Without further ado, it's 6 o'clock, and our meeting will begin with for item 1 is the acceptance of the minutes of the previous meetings, which would be 1/23/19 and 1/25/19. Yeah, it's all there. Oh, I'm sorry, excuse me. Do you have these? You have those.
No, I don't.
Oh.
I need the agenda. Thanks. Yeah. I just need one copy of each.
This is all 122.
Oh, there's only one? Okay.
I'll just give it a few minutes.
Okay.
Make a motion to accept the 123 minutes.
Okay, a motion has been made to accept the minutes of the meeting of January 23rd.
Second.
Second, all in favor?
All right.
Aye, opposed? Okay, accepted.
Can I see a copy of the 125? I didn't get that.
Here it is, right there.
Oh, I need one that has nothing written on
Oh,
it. Notes. Thanks. Oops.
any questions or comments regarding the minutes of the meeting of January 25th? If there are maybe
just-
any...
The continuing question is, once again, whether we feel we need more detail in the minutes than we're currently recording in them. And it's a question that I don't think we necessarily have to really address tonight, but at some point I think it's probably worth our all reading through the Attorney General's guidance on the open meeting law procedures and seeing whether the detail we're getting now really captures those requirements. And I know it's simpler for everybody, including me, to do a very condensed version and just rely on our recorded backup for full details. But, you know, the current draft is very short for what was a lengthy meeting, and it's short because it basically says during the appropriate, item 2, that we reviewed and discussed the responses to questions from a number of our applicants. And that certainly tells you that if you're going through these minutes and you want further detail on those discussions, which meeting you should check the recording of and where in that meeting roughly to look for them. But it doesn't tell us anything about what we actually said at the time. And I don't mean to stop everything so that we can discuss that again now, but for the future, when we are less pressed for time for substantive items on our agenda, we might want to revisit that question and see if we want more detail.
Okay, well, at this point,
But at
and
this
that's
point-
certainly noted, and at a time when we're
Yeah.
not as under as much time constraints as we have now, we can discuss it then. But at this
But
point,
at this
is there
point, I have no problem with the minutes, and I would move they be accepted.
a motion made?
Second.
Seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, opposed? No? Okay, so the minutes of the previous meetings are all accepted as stated, and we'll begin the second part of our story, is the having the folks come up with the presentation of their plans.
Actually, no, we're going to have the people who, I sent an email about this,
Okay.
people from the Holyoke,
Historic Commission and the
Commission.
Valley,
yeah, because the presenters know that they're starting at 6:45. That's why we're meeting earlier.
okay, well, what
We
would you like?
decided that
what was-
last meeting.
What was the definition of why, so that being said, I don't understand what you.
Okay, so maybe we could just have Debbie Opperman come up and Richard Alstrom and Shannon Walsh. Richard is not here this evening, but we have Christopher. We'll explain it all. One of our other okay, great. Yeah. Would you like Chris to come as well? Yeah, that would be excellent. And we can introduce everybody and then we can explain why Marco invited them. Yeah, this was all communicated by email. Yeah.
Okay. All right, guys.
Sorry to.
Identify who you are, where you're from.
I think they need another microphone, or maybe you can share that. Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, you can go ahead and introduce yourself. That's great.
Oh, thank you. My name is Debbie Opperman. I work in the Office of Planning and Economic Development. I'm a senior project manager and the staff liaison for the Historical Commission.
Christopher Gauthier, I'm with the Historical Commission.
Shannon Walsh, I'm the Historic Preservation Planner for the Pioneer Valley Planning Commission.
Great, thank you.
Okay,
Yeah, so-
so what function?
Yeah, so Marco and I had been in conversation about this. We talked about last meeting about having you come so that we can ask questions. And there was a lot that I sent you in the email, and obviously we don't have time to go over everything. But the way I see it is we're interested in your expertise, the Holyoke Historic Commission, first of all, on the nature of the proposed work, and sort of wondering if that's something that you can do, if that you can share your input. Can that be part of your role? And I guess I also am curious if that's something typical in your experience, Shannon, with CPA communities.
May I make one comment? The email that you sent us, Amy, from, I think it was Monday the 4th, I wanted to mention that a couple of the items right up front about what the Historical Commission's capacity could be, or our role in some of this, I don't have the authority to speak to this evening. The
Okay.
department head, Marcos Morera, would, and I know that he would be more than glad to meet with everybody. We just didn't have a whole lot of time from Monday to today with all the things. We're interested, obviously, in participating, but our only role to date had been noting the significance of the properties, and it stopped at that phase. So I just wanted to make that clear. Thank you.
Okay, so it's Marcos has to let us know what role the Holyoke Historic Commission could have.
Because he is concerned about staff time, and some of the items that are written down here, they could become very time-consuming. So I don't know how he feels about that right now.
Right. And any thoughts?
I think
No, and Chris was just brought into this
So
very
were
recently,
you
so.
thinking more that we'd use this time then for you to share your thoughts about the specific projects then, rather
Or
than?
would you rather wait for your boss to?
Well, the specific, I guess what, I had invited Shannon Walsh here today. She's the Historic Preservation Planner, as she said, at the Pioneer Valley Planning Commission. And Shannon has far more expertise than I do about some of the items that you were asking about. And I thought and I'm putting Shannon on the spot because we did not discuss this earlier, but if she could talk a little bit about the role of the Historical Commission in the very general way that the state sets it up as, that would be helpful, because I even have to go back to the legislation, which I know is very, well, not very, but it's vague enough so that it allows for each community to do their own thing.
Yes, I agree. I'm going to back up to a question about how other municipalities do it. And I know, for example, in Springfield, and they're new as well, so they're working out the process. They are also, they go back and forth a little bit with the Historical Commission. The last round, they had all applicants who were proposing historic preservation category projects go before the Historical Commission to initially get a letter of support. And then if they made it to the next round, they had to go back and get the scope of work approved. That proved to be challenging for timing, and some of the applicants just skipped that step. So they had to decide then, do we discount them? It's a work in progress, but I think that it is good to have a relationship like that with your historical commission and decide how you're going to do it. Just the way that this works in general, of course, if there's a project that's not necessarily on the state register, it's up to the historical commission to say if considered significant. And I understand there was some concern about that and trying to kind of rank what projects are more, but just that first question of whether it's significant or not, if the historical commission says yes, that just gets them to the next stage. It doesn't mean that you have to vote in approval or you have to vote 100% what they're agreeing to do, but it's just getting them to that next stage. So if that answers that
So
question.
the way that we did it is they would go to Debbie for letters of whether, asking whether this is a significant resource, and then that would be included in their application. So you're saying the next step in terms of Springfield was that after or before?
If they were approved, then, okay, you're eligible to submit the
then
full
they would
application,
submit the scope
then
of
they had to go back to the historical commission with the scope of work.
The local historical.
Yeah, and how detailed was the scope of work they would submit?
It would be like a regular thing where you would kind of draw out more information. So ideally, there's plans, and it just depends on the project. There was one that was landscape design. So someone from the Parks Department was there as well. There was another one. Yeah, just the way that you would get a historical commission application. The more information they submit, the better, because it helps you understand what they're trying to do. But again, so the historical commission, it's their job to say, yes, we know it's not on the national register, not state register right now, but we feel that it's significant to the history of Holyoke. They've done that job, but it doesn't mean that you have to, approve the project in the next round. You know what I'm saying?
Yes, I
Yeah.
totally understand that.
But that's just the first thing that they have to
So
prove.
we haven't done that we haven't told them, now you have to go and get your scope of work approved.
And it might not work for you. It might be too difficult. Springfield Historical Commission meets twice a month, so it's a little easier. Another thing I was talking about with Debbie is, and it's something that you would work out between your committee and the department, but maybe you could even just get the projects that you're heavily considering that have submitted the full application on their agenda and just ask for them to look over each one and give an opinion, not necessarily vote it up or down, but just give an opinion. Say, okay, they're saying that they would like to power wash the brick or sandblast the brick, and that's not within the standards, so we would recommend this instead.
Get on the agenda for the Holyoke Historic Commission? Okay.
With the historic proposals. and-
Once you have the full application. So that's just another, I was looking
The
through
actual
other communities in this area trying to figure out what everybody's doing, but everybody does it differently.
So you're saying the actual applicants would then get on the agenda and.
Or maybe you could send the applications. If you can't get the
Okay.
applicants to go, and just to make sure that
All right.
it's happening and it's not something that gets, lost in the weeds or with timing.
I was going to say, the Historical Commission right now, part of their responsibility is to do certain reviews. Because we're a certified local government, we might do them for tax credits or other loan programs. Anytime there's federal money involved, this local historical commission, the Holyoke Historical Commission, has to review the project and give an opinion to the state historic preservation officer, the Massachusetts Historical Commission. So we're accustomed to doing that kind of review. When we do those reviews, for instance, and I'm just going to get down to real nitty-gritty, if somebody wanted to put in, and I don't know the jargon exactly, but mini splits in an apartment building, let's say, for heating and air conditioning. In one project, I can tell you, we agreed to that, but it was based on the specifications that they submitted to us. We knew exactly what color they were going to be painted, because as they came in, they were hideous. We understood balancing the energy needs of the building with the historic preservation element of it, and they were flush, but we needed those specifications, and that's why it's so helpful. I think in the future it will be helpful to have the full application, or at least the specification part of it, so that we can actually say, yes, paint or
So that's
whatever.
what I did send you, the link to the applications, but usually the scope of work is pretty vague at this stage.
And I was just, you'll come up with your own way that works for you, but I was just trying to brainstorm a way that
Yeah.
the Historical Commission could handle the workload, and you could get the feedback that you're looking for.
Right.
And if you encourage the applicants for something that's historic preservation and it's so detailed, just say you really need to have plans, you need to have the scope of work from a contractor, you need to give as much information as possible, because the Historic Commission is going to give us an opinion, and you don't have time to go, and they don't have time to sit and listen to every single application necessarily. But if they have more information, they can give a better and more informed response.
Yeah, and this may be some guidance we can take into account when we revise our application procedures for next year, which I assume we'll be doing. And listening to this, another thing that occurs to me, although maybe if it's just the Historical Commission and us, this is overkill, but I know for some projects, like if you're coming in with major site plan review, the staff at your office will convene a meeting with departments from every city authority that's actually going to be involved in the decision. So before the planning board or the conservation commission even sit down, there will have been a discussion with the fire department and the police department and anyone else who has to be involved, all get together in a room and tell the applicant, okay, here's what you need to do. And then when they come in with the final application, they've got a lot of that resolved.
So the blessings of the various city departments should be in their packet prior to putting it in front of us.
Yeah, or, at least when they come in, if we still do a preliminary application before asking for a full application, maybe we should say, okay, once that's in, Amy will review it with staff from other city departments that might be involved in this, and see what the Historical Commission will need, what we'll need, what needs to be included when they come before us with the full app. Just so we can get that out of the way and people aren't, and we aren't blindsided late in the process with, we need this and we don't have it. And yeah, anything that does need fire or police or any other review, it's good to get it ahead of time, although I don't think we'll be seeing that.
I kind of disagree with that line of thinking. If somebody's, we're approving some funds for a project, they're still going to have to get a building permit. That's when all that stuff happens. So all of this, I think, what's the saying? A camel's a racehorse designed by committee. We're just trying to, get this thing going. And welcome, Shannon. I think we met at a conference at UMass with Chris
Skelly?
Skelly, right?
Yep.
About this time last year. Yeah. Well,
Thank you.
welcome to Holyoke.
Thank you. Thank you. Big fan.
So I love the idea of them coming with a letter from the historic, a letter of support. I think that's, and then if it's a really detailed project, and they're willing to do some oversight, or the Historic Commission says we'd like to do some oversight on this, that's great. That could be part of the terms that we put out. But, think about a lot of the things we're doing. We don't really need any oversight. Lanterns for the annex, some pointing work and stuff like that. Anytime they hire a contractor or something like that, they've got to pull a building permit anyways and stuff like that. And then all the rest of the stuff process just happens naturally. So to make them come to us with all of that stuff, they've got to do that anyways. We're just
No,
adding to the burden.
I wasn't thinking having them come to us with all of that stuff. There's something like that. You come in, you see, there's nothing that we need to see. The lantern thing was easy. I'm more concerned with projects like, the social center down in the flats that we've been round and round and round about. Is this historic? What are they actually doing?
Yeah.
And, for that matter, the Victory, what is actually involved in this scope of work? are these tax credits really applicable? Does this all work out for us? And, it seems to me, and I don't want to spend too much time on this now, but we, the 9 of us on this committee are spending a lot of time backing up and going over things that we thought we had settled. And I just think it would be nice next year if we can have a somewhat more efficient process so that when things come in before us, we know what we're looking at and we're ready to make decisions.
No, you're right. I think next year will be a heck of a lot easier than our birth, and at this point in time. Is it the thinking of this board that the function of the Historical Commission would be to have our applicants go to them and say, historically speaking, do you approve of our actions, historically speaking, for the city of Holyoke? If so, we'll get that letter inside our applicant before they give it to us. So at least we'll have an idea that the Historical Commission agrees with the 2 lanterns outside the building, or whatever the case may be. And
Yeah.
as a place to start, because
Yeah.
maybe her boss will have a different opinion. So at this point, just an historical answer or an observation.
Yeah, and just if the Historic Commission feels that they have enough information to certify a project, that's helpful to us right off the bat.
Right, it is.
Well, I think there's again, the 2 issues, right? There's eligibility, which is if lacking
The
the
first
list
hurdle.
on the state, does the Historic Commission believe that this is a historically significant property, right? Then it's yes or no, eligible, not eligible. Assuming that it is a historically significant property, then the scope of work, generally speaking, not detailed scope of work, but I think that the Flats Community Center is an excellent example. And not non-binding, but I think it would be helpful for,
Absolutely.
as a member of this committee, to get an opinion from the Historical Commission as to whether or not they believe that the stucco is
Appropriate.
is historic and
Right,
and just an opinion. I don't think that ties our hands one way or another whether we decide it, but I do think it would be helpful.
Yes, it would. Yes, it would.
So-
Marco?
I wanted to echo that a little bit because for me, and the community flats building was one of the most obvious examples of we have a project or an applicant who wanted to do a certain scope of work, and I don't believe that we would want to do something contrary to work that maybe has already been done by somebody, or if the Historic Commission already has their eye on a building, already has a plan for it, we shouldn't jump in and do something contrary. We should coordinate our efforts for the better good, I would think. And so having the once the, I guess, initial hurdle has been crossed, then I think it would be a good idea to at least have that background information. So then we can ask more targeted questions about, why they're restoring the building to a certain age, or whether or not certain details or certain materials are in line with what with what the city had in mind. So I feel like that would give us extra information to make a more educated decision on approving a project, so that when it gets built or when the funding goes through and the project is done, it's in line with everybody's expectations, and somebody doesn't say, "Whoa, why'd you do that?" We had this plan for it.
Right, no, well done, yes, well said. I think that's why we're here, we're talking about this.
So maybe
Go ahead.
next year's the right time to start. I
Yeah.
mean, this year we're already a little bit behind, but we'll.
I'm sorry, I know you can't see. I wanted to offer the Historical Commission's assistance at this point, because the other part of it I realize, and if I'm going too far, you just let me know. You're talking about next round, but right now you do have a round of projects before you, and I know there are questions about that. Amy has sent on those applications. The Historical Commission would like to be helpful at this stage as well.
Right.
Now, it's something I've got to work out with my department head. I guess here's what I'm wondering. When I looked at some of the applications, I felt like I didn't have enough information just yet. Some of the specifications were pretty
Vague, yeah.
non-existent, frankly. And I didn't know if it was up to the Historical Commission, we would return with that comment, that we can't make a decision based on the application at hand. So I guess I'm sitting here thinking, I don't want to just leave without offering some assistance, but I'm not sure what we can do in those cases. Some of them are straightforward, as Mr. Sullivan was mentioning, the lanterns, the stained glass window, they're pretty. But again, the 43 Canal Street and even MIFA, is it MIFA? MIFA?
Yeah, MIFA. They just came.
That can be, yes, a little different in the type of reviewing those.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure how we can be helpful, but we would like to be helpful at this stage to get your,
Yeah, and that's what I was wondering is like, I need to know what to do now. And,
Right.
and
right.
I am trying to get the applicants to be more specific about what they want to do. And so I need to figure out the process with you then.
Would it be, that being said, for this evening's purposes, do
Certainly.
you want to go back to your boss and ask him to set the parameters?
I will.
I think in speaking with the board, we're looking for a historical perspective. Does this type of function, whatever they want to do, is that, are you okay with what they're going to do to this building?
Right.
Historically speaking. We can take it from there, but we don't want to have dual purposes when you may have a different opinion. So we're interested in your opinion. Now, to what extent you guys can take it over, talking about it amongst yourselves, and he could direct to you, yes, we're going to go this far, since he's your boss.
Right.
And then we're happy to work with you. 'Cause we're reaching out and asking
Absolutely.
for you to advise us. That's basically it.
Um,
To what extent?
But there are a few more things.
Well, it's
just
up to our
bef-
boss. We
yeah,
can
but-
be here
No,
all
but I
night.
wanted to ask
But I
another
think that,
question.
yeah, we were just offered something that may be of extreme value, or potentially offered it, and that is the specific expertise necessary to notice when a question has not been answered with enough specificity for a reasonable evaluation of the answer. You know, it takes an expert sometimes to notice whether an answer is too vague to be useful, and to be able to really zero in on where more information is needed. And I think if the Historical Commission or anyone in Debbie's office can offer that help without it being, too much of a time sink to be allowable, that would be fabulous as soon as we could possibly get it.
Yeah, I mean, even if you could say which ones are, yeah.
I think we can do a pretty quick overview, and again, I can't stress this enough with Shannon's assistance, because being with the Regional Planning Authority, sorry, you can probably speak
Oh,
to
no,
the
yes,
local
exactly.
technical
So you're eligible for local technical assistance, which I've already started, and I'm happy to look over the applications too. But I think it's setting you up for the future, knowing what you want to see from applicants and giving them a checklist. And there was an applicant in Springfield who had everything last time but didn't submit the number of copies that they were supposed to submit. So everybody does it differently, but it's going to help you in the future know what questions you sort of know what you don't know about these projects, but it'll help you come up with what people really need to bring in to have a clear and straightforward application.
And Shannon, I know that you saw my email where I asked about like oversight of the standards and term restrictions and kind of reviewing changes in terms of that. Do you have information you can offer about that in terms of how other communities take care of those things?
I have your email here. Well, some of it goes back to what
Okay.
ends up the parameters being, but preservation restrictions and the whole, other historical commissions do hold preservation restrictions, and I know that also comes down to time in the future, monitoring them, so that's another kind of legal and time question. CPA preservation restrictions.
Yeah, because, one of them was just, I've been saying to the committee that I'm not sure, like, how the oversight of, meeting the standards will work in terms of.
As if a project's approved and as it goes.
Well, who's going to make sure that these.
I was looking up
applicants meet
other
the-
communities, and some of them have, like, you have to do a quarterly progress, just like a grant, you have to do a quarterly progress report. So you could request that the applicants who are awarded submit progress reports on the grant money that you awarded them. So I could send you some different formats I found in communities that have had CPA for a little bit longer.
But would those reports show that they're meeting the standards for historic rehabilitation?
Well, if they're doing what you approved
Okay,
them to
I
do,
see. Uh-huh.
then hopefully they're meeting the standard, if they're doing what they said they were going to do. Just
Yeah.
like with projects before the local historic commission, you know,
Yeah.
you're
I
not
just-
policing each project, but you have, you know,
I
you're-
just don't know if other communities actually have some kind of consultant or somebody who goes and looks at the work being done to make sure it really is in accordance.
I will find that out for you.
Okay.
It's a good question.
you.
Yeah,
And-
sure.
And then, yeah, the restriction question was about when it's a term restriction.
Oh, okay,
because-
Amy, Mike's got a question. Go ahead.
But I'm in the
And
middle of
Amy's done.
talking.
Oh, hurry up, let's go.
Yes, preservation, non-city, if the Holyoke, you were asking if the Holyoke Historical Commission could hold the restrictions?
Yes,
Yeah.
because in the case of.
And that's, again, that's up to their department, but
Right.
as a reminder, for municipal-owned properties,
Yeah.
the municipality cannot hold
Right.
its own preservation restriction.
And I learned, and that's very complicated, yeah, I learned
Very
that,
complicated. And
Somerville
however,
is-
I don't know how this is, if this is helpful at all, but I'm trying to set up through the Pioneer Valley Planning Commission's Pioneer Valley Venture Center a way to hold preservation restrictions because so many municipalities in our region don't have anyone to hold them, and the state is overwhelmed with them. So,
Oh,
um,
so is
I'm
this a
trying to-
problem for other communities?
yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Or I think
because-
there's maybe different preservation trusts hold them, different groups hold them, but
Yeah,
it's
'cause I
all,
know that
each
in
program is
Somerville,
handled
they were
differently.
gonna have, they were looking for a reciprocal exchange with another CPA community.
So I'll look into that for you and
Okay,
get back to you.
thank you very much, yeah.
Okay. And- Mike, go ahead.
Okay, so one of the things we keep, previous we had talked about a lot was Secretary of the Interior guidelines.
That's what I mentioned, yeah.
Yeah, so now you mentioned, but we're not using any federal funds, right? These are all local funds, local tax dollars. Are we bound by following Secretary of the Interior guidelines?
Yes, we are.
Yes, by the way that the CPA is set up and
All right,
by your,
I just want to make sure that, because it's,
Yeah, it's
under
absolutely-
historic
All right.
preservation category projects only.
okay.
Any other questions from the board? Okay. We'll await, actually, we'll await what you folks, with your boss.
Yep, and I'll be in touch with Amy. I know Amy stays in close touch with our office, so. we'll
Okay.
be-
Yeah, we're welcome your assistance and your opinions, very much so.
Sorry that we didn't have more time. There's so much
Just,
to discuss.
We got a lot on our plate.
And
this
thank
evening.
you
Oh,
so much.
I understand. My
Thank you.
pleasure. I hope it helped and didn't provide more confusion, but
No, thank you for coming.
thank you. Thank you. Nice to meet you.
Good to meet you.
Oh, Jesus.
In terms of this part of our meeting, we'll begin with the applicants and presentation of their plans, the first one being the Holyoke Boys and Girls Club playground.
Are they here? We're like 5 minutes early.
They're here. 5 minutes would be okay.
Yeah, as long as they're here.
Welcome, hi Eileen.
Hi, how are you?
Connor.
Thank you very much. We have a PowerPoint that Connor's going to hook up for you guys.
Oh, great.
I just have some brief materials because I'll be honest with you, I take every opportunity I can to educate more people about the Boys and Girls Club in the community.
Thank you.
So there's some background information in addition to a copy of the site plan and then the proposed budget. So that's what you have in front of you. So my name's Eileen Cavan. I'm the Executive Director of the Boys and Girls Club of Greater Holyoke, and with me tonight is Connor Bevan, who is the Director of Program Development for the Boys and Girls Club of Greater Holyoke. It's always something. I know, it's all right. Well, I told you I'd wing it. I can wing it otherwise, too, trust me.
You don't have a flash drive?
I
that you could-
appreciate the efforts.
Maybe you could just use the laptop that's set up?
It's always something with technology. So in terms of the format, do you just want me to start talking now?
Sure.
Or am I going
Go
to be
ahead.
answering direct questions? I mean, just so as not to waste time, Okay, all right. So I've already introduced myself. Just to give you a little background history, Boys and Girls Club of Holyoke has been in the community for 126 years. We are a deeply rooted youth organization. We've had only 2 locations in Holyoke, both being in downtown. First started off on Race Street and then moved up just 2 streets to Nick Cosmos Way, which used to also be Bond Street at the time. The new building, we call it a new building, on Nick Cosmos Way was actually built in 1969, so we're just going on our 50th year with the building. The property that we're talking about with you tonight is a park, a multipurpose park right now that's located across the street from the main club on Nick Cosmos Way. It's about 27,000 square feet, a little over half an acre, 0.63 acres of land, and was deeded to us back almost 25 years ago, back in 1995. So the space that we're talking about has not seen any kind of renovation or improvement since. So, is it not? It's not. Okay, so that's all right. We can carry on. It's all good. Although I will share with you, Connor did an incredible job putting together a wonderful video, very short and brief, hearing from our youth in particular about what they would like to see in a park. And so at some point next week, at the public hearing, you'll get a chance to see it, I suppose. So we're going to carry on. So just to let you know, like I said, we're a 126-year-old institution. We are, I think one thing that's important to mention is that Boys and Girls Clubs, we are part of a national affiliation with Boys and Girls Clubs of America, but each organization is actually what I call independently owned and operated. We are responsible for our own financials and our bylaws. We have a separate board of directors, and believe it or not, there is actually very little financial support that comes through the national organization. So each organization is really responsible to raise their own funding and resources, create their own programs and services that are directly responsible and relate to the local community. We currently are a large after-school program. We serve in excess of 350 kids a day, ages 5 to 18. We operate 5 sites in Holyoke, 1 main club at 70 Nick Cosmos Way, which is our largest site. We also operate 4 satellite sites in the public housing communities of Tefford, Bowdoin, Churchill, and Lyman. We've been operating free after-school program in those satellite units for over 25 years in partnership with the Housing Authority. So it allows us to serve over an additional 100 kids a day, but more importantly, it allows us to serve youth who would not have access to transportation downtown, and being able to provide them with enriching opportunities. So mission of the Boys and Girls Club is to create competent, caring, contributing members of our community. We do that literally one child at a time and have had some wonderful successes over the 126 years. We offer a wide variety of opportunities and activities with our kids. Cornerstone, I'd say, of our programming is mentoring and caring adult relationships. So this is about serving youth who are considered disadvantaged in Holyoke and needing a safe space to go where they can have fun, but more importantly, where they're interacting with caring adults in a mentoring-like relationship. Our priority outcome areas are academic success, healthy lifestyles, and good character and citizenship. And so our programming and services are all filtered through those 3 main areas. We have very strong relationships with the Holyoke Public Schools and other local charter schools, ensuring that the kids are progressing to the next grade level, have prioritized our academic success programs over the years due to, a direct response to the failing school systems in Holyoke, understanding that the kids need to learn to read and write and compute in order to be competent, caring, contributing members of our community. So education is a cornerstone of our programming, definitely. But also healthy lifestyles, which brings us tonight to the park area. And so we're really excited to be able to be here tonight to answer any questions that you may have about our proposal. Like I said, the property was deeded back to us almost 25 years ago. The basketball court has not seen any improvements in particular, nor has the park in 24 years. Outside of us maintaining it to the absolute best of our ability, resources are certainly tight over the years. It's been difficult to maintain 5 sites in Holyoke with really low-cost options for our youth. And as you all know, the economy's tanked and giving is down, and it's a challenge. And so we were really excited when this opportunity came about within the city of Holyoke. So I don't know if you have some specific questions about our project. We tried to craft the proposal in a two-phase project for two reasons. First off, the reality is that we are really looking to do a complete renovation of the entire space. It's much needed. The amount of use that park gets is amazing. I mean, we have 150 kids out there every single day, weather permitting, in addition to Girls Inc., which shares a space with us, has an additional 30 kids. The neighborhood, it's one of the only parks with play structures and basketball courts in the immediate downtown neighborhood. So the space really gets used quite a bit. There's no question that wear and tear over the years is what our issue is. But what we did was try to present it in two phases, so that if we were not, for whatever reason, eligible for complete park renovation, we would like to at least be considered for some portion of it. And we set a priority of our phase one, which is our basketball court. We currently have a full concrete basketball court with 2 half courts right now. That has a lot of cracks in it. Unfortunately, I did have pictures on a wonderful PowerPoint, if you are not familiar with the space. But needless to say, what we're proposing is to resurface and redesign one portion of the property. Phase one is about 4,700 square feet. It would be to resurface and repaint and recreate a new full-size basketball court, and then remove the 2 half courts and create an actual green infrastructure, a lawn with a sprinkler system and a shade component. And so one of the things that you were going to hear from our kids directly was that it's hot outside, especially in the summer. And our kids are out in that park every single day of the summer. We have no shade, unfortunately, and so one of the new designs would be to create some kind of shade component as well, and there's no grass. And so we were looking to really kind of change the entire look of the property, by creating some green infrastructure. Phase two would be a redesign of the current actual play structures, the jungle gym, the swings. I mean, we have, kind of the most basic play equipment. Another critique that you would hear from the kids if we had the technology would be that it's kind of boring, that the play structures aren't up to date and cool any longer and things like that. So it was a proposition to revamp the Phase two is the opposite section, which is about 17,000 square feet, so it's much larger. But what we would do is, we have right now a site plan to create walking paths through it and what they call sitting walls, where there's planting areas, because one of the other critiques is that there's nowhere to sit in the park, unfortunately, so we don't have tables and benches or anything, it's just play equipment. And so the sitting walls would act as natural, obviously, sitting opportunities with landscaping, new play equipment, and most importantly is the impact material, the ground covering for play structures. So we are regulated by the Department of Early Education and Care for a child care program, and so we are obligated to make sure that we have a certain amount of what they call impact material underneath the play structures. We currently are using wood chips because it's the most cost effective. But it's not the most efficient by any stretch. So every time it rains, kids kicking, we're constantly out there raking in to try to get our impact areas up to code. And so part of the new proposal would be to install the new rubberized play material, which has a much longer shelf life than wood chips, and we would be able to control better within the specific impact areas as well. So I don't know if there's maybe some specific questions that someone might have, or please.
Yep. My really only concern is, do you have room with the resurfacing of this for expanding parking in a different direction and keeping cars off the?
Right. So, I mean, the reality is that we have plenty of parking at Cosmos Way. So not only do we have both on-street parking on both sides of the road, but we also have a really large back parking lot. So we have the capacity to handle parking. Right now, what you see is if you've been at the club for any kind of event and have parked on the current basketball court, it's really just it's a convenience is what it comes down to, and because there can't be any more damage done to that basketball court than what's already there. So if, we are awarded funding and able to renovate the basketball court, we're very confident that we would still have plenty of parking to accommodate our families and any events that we have with both on-street and our back parking lot. It would not be an issue at all.
And is there some mechanism in the design to keep people,
We have a fence.
become
We currently have a
accustomed to
fence now that we have the capability of locking and closing for parking capacities, and so it would be a similar, it would be a similar setup. The design absolutely incorporates fenced-in portions of the park, and that's obvious for obvious safety reasons.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Oh, great, thank you very much. Okay, so we'll just, scoop through a lot of this stuff, but, we just really wanted to emphasize that after-school hours, especially in a community like Holyoke, are really essential. There's no question that we have kids that engage in risky behaviors when they're out of school. Parents are working or engaged otherwise, and so there's a lot of unsupervised youth in the city of Holyoke, and so there's no question that the Boys and Girls Club serves a very important purpose in the community of Holyoke. There's 5,000 school-age Holyoke kids we serve, and we'll see in the course of a year almost 3,500 of those kids in some capacity. So we are serving quite a large number of Holyoke youth. This is just some of our numbers. I wanted to try to emphasize the fact that, we really are more just giving you the scope and breadth of our organization. I think that a lot of people don't realize that we are operating 5 sites, the number of youth that we will see in the course of a year, and the demographics of the youth. We are specifically going out and doing outreach to youth who need the club. I also wanted to highlight or try to make sure that you understood that we are beyond just a recreation organization. And so certainly it is an important component of the work that we do, but academic success, good character and citizenship, and healthy lifestyles are also very important. And we prioritize our outcomes. And so we're surveying our kids. We're working with funders to create pre and post surveys to understand what the impact of our programming actually is. So we grade ourselves on an annual basis. And we look at what our strengths and weaknesses are, and we will reevaluate as an organization, both at the board level and internally within staff, and then with youth, to find out where we can improve. And so these are just some of our highlights in terms of how we have impacted what we consider academic success, good character and citizenship, and healthy lifestyles. You have this information in front of you as well. So, and this is the video that I was speaking of. Well, maybe it is. I know. Every opportunity that we can get to highlight our kids. So we're just trying to demonstrate and show to you guys that, you know, it's important for us to create as much youth input as possible, because when you do that, they have ownership of the club, and then they respect the space. And so anytime we're doing any kind of improvement to the facility or trying to engage the kids in new programming or services, we really make an effort to try to survey our youth as much as possible, get their opinions and ask their opinions. And I know it may seem like it was a bit planned, so to say, in the fact that they talked about shaded structure and new basketball hoops, but those are really our, you know, the priority. And the play structures and things like that. So they're really obvious priorities, I guess, is what it comes down to. So this is just what we wanted to talk about. If you had any questions with respects to Phase 1, wanted to give you some current kind of shots of what the space is that we're speaking of. You know, specifically the large cracks in the pavement and just kind of repainting and the basketball hoops itself and things like that, so.
I know we talked, or we mentioned that there might be, the committee may want to set a term restriction of some kind, and you said that that probably would be okay for a 5-year. And then it sort of came up that the committee isn't sure how many years they would want it for, so.
Yeah.
Do you have any more thoughts on that?
Well, I will tell you that our board of directors, you know, we've had a conversation at that level, at the board level, with respects to any kind of deed restriction. And so the reality is that we own and maintain that space, but it is open for public use. And what we found, to be honest with you, is that it is respected by our neighbors. They appreciate the opportunity to use it, and which is why I think it's so respected. And so, you know, you can see we don't have graffiti or don't have a lot of trash that's picked up. We really try very hard to maintain that. And so it's not that far of a stretch for us to understand that there needs to be a public use. We want there to be a public use, to be honest with you. So as long as we're part of the negotiation and can contribute to the negotiation of an agreement, our board of directors would not necessarily have an issue with that at all. They understand the purpose of the funding.
I don't, and anybody can correct me or I don't think the deed restriction has to do with as much public use as once we invest the money in it, that for some reason the property could be turned around and sold, that you'd agree to, am I correct on that?
Well, that's also related to public use, though, because the idea is that it should have a public benefit if it's, you know, coming from these public funds for the community, so that the deed would incorporate public use. But that doesn't mean that it has to be open to the public all the time.
Oh, no, I mean, public parks are not open
Right,
to the public all the
exactly.
time right now. Yeah, we're
Right.
very comfortable with being able to set
But
what
I
are the
mean,
restrictions.
yeah, that includes not selling, because obviously then it can't be open to
Yeah.
the public if it were sold, so.
And we understand that as well. So again, if we can be part of the negotiations, and come to an agreement in the term, in the length of the term, that is something that I'm confident that our board understands. Again, they understand where the funding is coming from. They understand the purpose of the funding. And that was a decision that we had talked about even prior to submitting an application, to be honest with you, Mike. So I don't think it's unreasonable. Of course, it is something that I have to bring back to my board. I operate through a board of directors, so it would require a full board vote.
Madam Chairman, as I'm sure you know, our applicants, the very first one is the Holyoke Boys and Girls Club. We're just starting out, so if you want to take over the meeting, go ahead.
Any questions for them while they're here?
Keep reminding
Oh, sorry, yeah. Any questions for, hi, how are you? For Boys and Girls Club, any questions on anything that you heard?
Not for me.
In terms of the funding, Eileen, does it work well with the project to have it to be funded in Phase 1 and Phase 2, as opposed to getting the check for the whole amount? How does that work out in terms of the operation and construction?
Yeah, it really doesn't matter that much. Like I said, we split it up in phases as a convenience, and to be honest with you, didn't want to kind of knock ourselves out of a pool if you know, it was too big of a project. But the reality is that we're pretty confident with our timeline. When we were putting the application together, we got a couple, you know, soft bids, certainly. There wasn't a ton of time to really get into the nitty with contractors, but we did speak to more than one, and we talked about a timeline and such, and felt like we would start with the basketball court as our priority project, though. So if awarded full funding for the entire project, the first demonstrated thing that you would see change is the basketball court. We would start with the basketball court.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Personally, I was okay with the 5-year term, but someone was going to look into whether it should be longer. Was anybody going to look into that? What's that?
I haven't looked into it. I have done nothing for the past week.
She's,
Okay.
haven't been well, right? Yeah.
So you were the one that was going to look into it, so you don't want us to say anything yet on that?
We have the, I think, agreement in principle that the Boys and Girls Club understands the need for the restriction, however long state guidelines seem to feel is appropriate. They obviously need to go back to their board and will negotiate with us, but it doesn't seem to be an issue that's going to cause any problems.
Okay.
And we don't have to resolve it tonight, I don't think.
No. No, we don't. I just wondered if you had gotten any information on that. Okay, anybody else?
All right.
Okay.
I appreciate
Thank
your
you so
time. Thank you
much.
so very much.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thanks, Connor.
Okay, so that one's done. Okay,
Oh,
so the next one, the Victory Theater? Victory,
Going to
what's
move on
next?
to Kestrel and
Oh, the
Gloutak.
Kestrel, the
I think
Gloutak?
that's on there.
Yeah, okay.
oh, the next is the Gloutak Woods.
Where the
Oh,
heck is that?
here they are.
Okay.
Woods are moving.
Where is that thing anyway? I gotta find it. Ah, here it is. Okay. Good, good. Thank you for coming in.
Do you have one more of those, buddy? or-
Did they leave their PowerPoint?
Oh, I think I have one.
Oh, now you tell me.
Okay.
But they might have left the thumb drive, that's all.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen, for coming in. Would you like to introduce yourselves to us so we'll know?
Sure, thank you. My name's Lee Halasz.
Mark Wamsley, Conservation and Stewardship Manager with Kestrel Land Trust.
Andrew Smith, City of Holyoke Conservation and Sustainability Director.
Okay.
Right, so yes, I'm doing an AmeriCorps program with Kestrel Land Trust. I have for the last 2.5 years.
Okay. All right, thank you. Okay, so go ahead and make your presentation.
Sure, so we've just got a brief introduction to the project. Thank you for having us. Really appreciate the opportunity to come here. So Kestrel Land Trust is a non-profit that works in the Central Pioneer Valley area, conserving land, caring for land, and connecting people to the land. It's exciting that another municipality in our area has the CPA because it's a great way to conserve land, and it was fantastic when Holyoke had a project and asked Kestrel if we'd happy to be involved, and we certainly are happy to help Holyoke get through this first project and maybe many more to come of land conservation. So we do have a largish map there. I'm not sure how useful that is. It's a blown up version of what you've got on the back of that flyer. So if you can look at the flyer, you're okay. That might be useful for other people. So it is a large parcel that's there at 51.5 acres. It's an interesting area there. We think there's a lot of community interest in the parcel. Certainly we've been aware of Kestrel's been aware of the parcel for a couple of years, and I believe Holyoke City has as well. In the last few months and more, we've been speaking to more of the local community, and we've had a lot of positive feedback that great, it'd be magic for this to stay the way it is. So hopefully that can happen. I think it's got a lot of great values. It certainly has some amazing wildlife habitat values. It's a great area of natural open space, and I think it has a lot of potential for recreation. It's already used by the local community informally, and I don't think it's probably going to change a lot more than that. It is adjacent to Gloutak Park, which is a formal recreation area, and it will expand significantly onto that. So it's exciting that to put those two parcels together. It certainly meets a lot of the values that the Community Preservation Plan talks about and the Open Space and Recreation Plan in terms of preserving wildlife habitat, preserving open space, recreational access to residents. So I think it does hit a lot of those targets. The plan is that the city would own the parcel, and Kestrel's happy to hold a conservation restriction on that parcel. The CPA does require, when there's land conservation or land being purchased, that there is a conservation restriction, and Kestrel often works with other municipalities doing that. So anyway, it's just a brief introduction. Happy to take any questions. I know you have some specific, but over to you. Unless Andrew or Mark have something more to contribute.
Not really, nope.
Sorry, was someone going to say
Go
something?
ahead, Amy, if you have questions.
No, I was just going to mention that we did get a letter from Chris Coe, who's an abutter in support of this project, as well as, I think it's 12 signatures of neighbors who are all in support of this project.
And what street were they from?
She's on Mountain Road.
Rock Valley and Mountain. Mostly Rock Valley, and Mountain, and Mountain too?
Yeah.
Okay.
And also Andrew had submitted answers to some of these questions that were raised that I hope everybody got a chance to look at. But he can also maybe address some of that if you want.
If you like, I can go through those point by point if you choose.
Sure.
Okay. So the first question that you guys had that was emailed by Amy to me was, what is the timing for when we'll receive the order from the probate court that the title is in Marcia Cassidy's name? And we just had an update today from attorney Matt Donahue. He's representing Marcia Cassidy, the property owner. And according to her attorney, today at noon was the deadline for anybody who's going to dispute the estate. From his words that were relayed to us is they don't expect anybody to dispute the estate. They're going to have an answer by Friday or next week. So that's moving through the courts and it's totally closed out in terms of the public comment period as of noon today. So if you have any questions, he offered us to phone him in if so desired. But our understanding is that's progressing. And good speed relative to the timeline. The second thing was there was a question about what is the developability of the land, and I think I submitted to you just a quick narrative that summarized the challenges that go with a a parcel like this. One of which is that 1971, when those subdivisions were done on Rock Valley, there's a note that was included on the plan that specifically says not to be used for development purposes due to inadequate frontage. So. And our zoning ordinance was adopted within a month of this plan being recorded. So the intent at the time of this being kind of subdivided was to create an unbuildable lot. So fast forward, 40 some odd years, and here we are with a proposal to conserve a lot that was originally intended to be not built upon. So that's a good thing. So the original intent, the landowner, not to be built upon, had some conversations with the planning department. They said, well, that's recorded in the registry of deeds. There is some validity to that. Maybe somebody could challenge that in court and overcome it. If they did overcome that, then there's still the fact that we have a couple of things. We have land use controls that are local. We have zoning ordinance. We have local wetlands regulations. We have state wetlands regulations, and we have natural heritage endangered species program. And other projects in this area, such as there's a solar farm, solar array that was proposed up near the cemetery, Forest Hill Cemetery, a few years ago. That project was, a stone's throw away, and they're required to do a land preservation agreement for the impacts to rare species habitats. So I can't imagine that the species of consideration would not be within this area. So what you have in these scenarios is that normally it's a 2-to-1 mitigation for any impacts to land. So say, for example, you have 52 acres, you're going to have maximum of 17 some odd acres that you could probably build on. You're going to subtract some for wetlands considerations. There's also the fact that within this zone you have to have 50 feet in order to do a subdivision road in order to access a parcel. So in order to get 50 feet, you have that, but there's 50 feet of frontage. Every single parcel that's on a subdivision road has to have 200 feet of frontage because of the fact this is in the Water Resource Protection Overlay District. So that means that you would end up having to build a big honkin' subdivision road that would cost a lot of money in order to grant access to like 3 or 5, one housing lot easily, 3 and 5 with little more difficulty. So what you're ending up with is not a lot of houses, there's going to be a lot of investment in a big expensive driveway. And really what we have is what is the intent of the landowner? And right now you have the landowner that's saying, I would like to conserve this land. My original intent was to conserve this land, and I'd like to follow through on doing that. So yeah, probably there is a potential for developability, but in a private transaction between a seller and a buyer, it doesn't seem like that's their interest or their desire. So it doesn't seem like the city should be interjecting in a way that would circum or contravene those intentions. And so I think, so that's sort of like the summary of developability. The long short is that you're not going to get a lot of houses there in any conceivable scenario. So that's the question of developability. And third is, can I confirm that land will be accessible for passive recreation purposes? So the goal is not to change anything at all. There's no plans, it's just conserve the land. It's worth noting that when you look at the maps on this parcel, there's about 300 acres of forested area that's in people's backyards in this section between Rock Valley and Mountain Road and 141 in this sort of like triangle. And this 52-acre parcel is kind of right in the middle of that 300-acre chunk of land. So if you took this out of, if you're making your sort of patchwork of land conservation, if you pulled this out of the conservation mix, what you end up doing is you end up fragmenting this forest land, And so when we look at the state habitat maps, when we look at the state CAPS map, what you have is you have an interior forested area, which, there's not a lot of that, and it just so happens that Holyoke has a lot of preserved land, and that's like a regionally important thing, and it's something that people are going to come to value more and more as time goes on. So this has an opportunity to kind of knit together in a substantial way a large forested tract of land in an important part of the city. We have drinking water supplies, you have groundwater aquifers, you have all sort of wonderful things. There's great wetlands characteristics out there. There's all these wonderful groundwater seeps coming off of the hillside. So I think, everything has its place, right? We heard an application today for a downtown park, right? And that's the goal, is to have a downtown park. And I think each land use lends itself to certain, how can I say, potential, right? So the potential for this might just be a nice forested piece of land that continues to remain a nice forested piece of land that's in people's backyards.
Anybody have any questions? That was the last one, there was just...
For me, and then there are other questions related
Those
to
other
like
questions?
the budget and stuff like that.
I think you had submitted it.
But
Yeah, we have submitted that. But if there's questions, happy to answer them.
Yeah,
well, I just,
Mimi, if you
if
have
I
a
may,
question for...
I just wanted to see if maybe you could expand on the fragmentation issue a little, because that was something that had jumped out at me, and I just didn't have the expertise to be able to guess whether it was a real issue for these lands in Holyoke. But certainly, you read about areas where there are endangered species, and part of what endangers them is that although technically there's enough room, the areas that have been conserved don't abut, there are no pathways through, and you get species dying out simply because there is no, the areas are too much of a patchwork to actually be a workable habitat for the species in question. And I wondered about how this piece of land, which is does seem to be at a break point for a lot of what's already out there, plays into that, or whether that isn't a consideration at all. And I think you touched on it, but I wanted to make sure I was hearing you correctly on that.
So yeah, so you have the main landowners, you have Holyoke Waterworks, you have Gas and Electric, you have DCR, and you have Mass Wildlife. And then there's a number of small private in-holdings that are really going to be crucial in the years going ahead, depending upon the landowner's intent for conservation. I'd say there's probably 25 parcels over 25 acres maybe that are in private hands, just off the back of the envelope calculations. So so going north to south, you have a really solid connected network of open space and forested lands because of those three landowners I listed: Gas and Electric, Holyoke Waterworks, and the state. So the task for long-term like if the goal would be to have some long-term stability for this landscape, would be to preserve as much of it as you can along that forested corridor. So it makes sense to invest in long-term preservation of an area that already has a lot of really substantial preservation activities, just to create a corridor, in effect, running north to south.
You know, if I can add just to your question, you know, just in terms of the basics of landscape ecology, wherever you have a forest core like that, it provides a buffer for the wildlife living inside. The more kind of patchworks you have cut out of it, the more edge it creates, and edge creates disturbance. You know, you just think of things, I think one of the basic examples is you have a number of houses. What do those houses often have? Cats. So suddenly cats can penetrate further into the forest and start predating on things. You obviously have more pollution of water, more insecticides, pesticides applied. So again, you know, having a forest core, particularly in a city like Holyoke, is pretty important and pretty unusual. So that's basically how the patchwork works. If you start getting it broken up, you know, you start degrading the wildlife values of the area. I also think Andrew touched on a really good point that a project like this, especially where you're dealing with a keystone property right in the middle, can often result in the conservation of properties around it. It often has a domino effect. People start getting the idea, oh, this project happened here, this is great. It worked out for the landowner, it worked out for the city, and hopefully this is a stepping stone to future conservation in the area, as well as obviously throughout the city as well.
Yeah, no, I know that there's strong public interest in it in that area because I was on the planning board when that solar farm proposal came up, and the neighborhood, you know, was very, very concerned about the wildlife that they were used to seeing and about that habitat being disturbed. So.
Yeah, and I would add, and I think it also speaks to the importance of the property that, you know, Mass Wildlife was interested in it, certainly in some point. It sounds like they didn't turn out to be the right partner for the property, but I mean, to have kind of their blessing that a property is important to protect is usually a pretty good sign.
They did write a strong support letter. You've probably seen that in the application.
And to follow up on the solar conversation, not to create a scare tactic, but when everything was sort of hot and heavy in the solar market, when every single vacant piece of land was being looked at, we did have a number of solar developers who were like kind of sniffing at that parcel, being like, "Ooh, here's a big chunk of land." So, I think the important thing to note when it comes to land conservation is oftentimes you don't have multiple swipes at the same parcel. It's like sometimes you get your chance and you go for it and you get it. And you do, and you succeed, or you miss it, and it becomes something else. So I think this would be a good first success for the CPC to sort of tuck away in your back pocket.
I would also just add really quickly that, you know, the land was obviously on the market, and, you know, offers were coming in. The realtor is actually one of the people who called us about it. They were fielding calls just about every week or every other week. So we have no idea how serious those were, but you know, it was. You know, strike when the iron is hot. You know, the iron is hot right now for this one.
Okay. Anybody else? Go ahead, Mike.
I've got a couple of concerns, and you can feel free, whoever wants to address each one. Well, my first would be, Holyoke right now already has 6,200 acres of open space. More than half of the acreage of Holyoke is already open space. So, and just to put that in comparison, Chicopee, our next door neighbor, 700 acres. Us, over 6,000. So, if the owner has an interest in conserving it, I'm fine with that. Why don't they donate it? If the 12 abutters are concerned, why don't the 12 abutters purchase it and donate it? Why doesn't Mass Wildlife buy it from the owners? Why, when Holyoke has already done so much and has so much land, we don't have, per our own economic development people, we've had people come here, we have no space to develop. Why are we going to take our limited resources, $179,000, and acquire more? You know, it's, and if the owner's got a market for it, let the market play it out. And if they've got if somebody wants to come and fight all those fights that Andrew's laid out, that's their problem. Why are we going to put $179,000 out when we've done so much already and we have such limited resources? That's my big hang up. To add to it, you know? just to add more to what we're already doing.
Do you want me to address? I mean, I can attempt to. I think in reference to surrounding communities, I think it depends on how you look at it. I mean, part of the reason why there's a lot of land preserved in Holyoke is because there's so much of value in Holyoke. I know over the years, in conversations with people who buy land, Holyoke is usually on people's radars just because of the uniqueness of where it sits in relationship to the, and this is I'm gonna get like super geeky here, but like you have the collision between like the coastal plain and like the uplands. And so there's a lot of stuff that just kind of comes together in Holyoke that is just really unique. So, Chicopee is nearby, but it's just not as good. It's just not as good of a place. So I would say that part of the reason why there's a lot that's conserved here is because it's really high value and it's worth conserving.
Can I ask a question about that now? Is it because a lot of that is on the mountain? Do we, is that where a lot of that open space is because it's not developable up there, or?
Some of it's steep slope, some of it is.
Because they don't have a mountain in Chicopee.
Yeah, but there's also there's a location between the mountains and the river, and the fact that you have all these waterways in between, and there's a lot of places that just aren't like Holyoke when it comes to the relationship between the mountain and the river.
Where is all that 6,200
Most of it,
acres?
yeah, it's along the spine. So you also have two mountain ranges. You have East Mountain in the south, and you have Mount Tom in the north. And so you have these they're these old volcanic sort of basalt cliffs that have really unique geology, and so you have like plant and animal communities that live there that don't really live, say in Chicopee, or So I think that's part of the reason why, for that one particular comparison, why you wouldn't see that. I mean, there's not a lot of farmland in Holyoke. I mean, Holyoke had some farmland. It was developed in the 19th century. So from an open space perspective, I can see why the long-range planning that the forefathers did on creating a network of reservoirs for for having quality drinking water, combined with the decision to create the sort of the Mount Tom Park. Boston has the Emerald Necklace. It's like this sort of long-term legacy planning accomplishment. In some ways, Holyoke has a similar accomplishment, which is it's a community that has an intact mountain range and like within, walking distance of a very developed urban core. So when it comes to land preservation, why this particular property? And I think I would just sort of counter with the fact that, the city has two lots that are permanent on Mountain Road that have been they've gone through the A&R process, they've gone through the 21E land clearing process, they've gone through natural heritage, and the city for extenuating circumstances, has opted not to sell those two lots that are owned by the city. So I would say if there is an urgent need for housing, then the evidence doesn't suggest that, the actions do not suggest that the urgency is there based upon decisions to not market those two parcels that are within the same distance of this piece of property. And then just to go back to the fact that it's the interest of the landowner, I guess, could they donate it to the city? I think yes and no. They could, but then there would have to be, there's a limited amount of money you can get back for it. There's also, one might argue that they are in some ways, might be taking a haircut on what this parcel is worth. It's assessed at $300,000. This comes in well below the assessed value, so one might argue that they are in some sense making a form of a donation by not saying it's assessed for $300,000, give us $300,000.
But Andrew, you've already told us it's pretty much undevelopable.
Yep.
And there hasn't been any interest. Why are we going to spend, we've got, in CPA money, we don't have a lot of money to work with, and as you see, just a presentation before you, that affects, I forget the exact, 1,000 kids.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh.
So, 6 times this summer, I hiked the New England Trail from Whiting Reservoir up to McLean Reservoir. I never saw another person. So, because this has hiking trails and stuff like that, we've got so much open space right now that it's really not going to benefit the public as far as use goes. All right? why are we going to spend $179,000 of our limited resources to add to an underutilized resource that we already have?
Oh, in regards to that, I would go back to the intent of the Community Preservation Act itself, which has percentages that are carved out for certain projects. I mean, you have a statutory obligation to do open space, housing, and historic preservation. So open space recreation.
Yep.
So I would say, like, you know, I can understand why. I mean, it seems like it's within the bailiwick. So I guess it's ultimately the decision of the CPC what you want to do with it. But I would say, like, it's within the scope of what you're statutorily obligated to spend money on. So I would say, like, that seems to be within the bailiwick of things to allocate funding
No,
to.
this has nothing to do about statutory obligations. We know what that is. We have the money. It can wait for a viable project. My question is, it's not really getting the answer. We've got this one. Why, with everything else we've got going, would we spend $180,000 on this? The landowner, I feel bad for them. They'd like it to go that way. But because they can't sell it to a developer, because it's undevelopable, we should put out $180,000 of taxpayer
I
money?
think they actually have had offers to purchase it.
Absolutely.
I think if they don't, I think if they don't sell it to us, they'll probably just sell it to somebody else. You know, I think there is an interest in selling it off to somebody, and I think mostly it's just, I think my understanding of the conversation with the landowners, their intent is to sell it for preservation, but if they don't sell it for preservation, they would just sell it for something else.
Yeah, absolutely, which is why it's on the market right now, and the people who are calling aren't conservationists who are calling the realtor, they're developers, and they're fishing around with prices. I think they're trying to do their homework, but they're definitely getting offers on it. So it is the bet on the developer side that it is actually developable. I mean, I just add to Andrew's point about the Community Preservation Act and the conservation portion of it. I mean, it certainly gets down to how the city wants to kind of rank projects for conservation importance. You know, if you have to use money for conservation, this is an extension basically of East Mountain. It has a lot of good conservation values, and I'd almost ask, you know, if not this, what? It certainly ranks fairly highly, again, from an ecological perspective, and it has a potential recreational component now. You know, it's fairly passive. Who knows in the future what it could potentially become? You know, I think it's very nice that there's access to it on Gloutak Park already. And again, just from being in this, I wouldn't say business for a while now, it really is a strike while the iron is hot. You don't get, like Andrew said, a chance for a second swipe at an important property very often. So again, you know, from a strict, you know, conservation perspective, this is a very important property in a very important area. Could it have other value added as well, potentially? But, you know, I also have to say, for a city like Holyoke, it doesn't seem like a lot of, I mean, it's $179,000 is a lot of money, certainly. But for a property, you know, I've certainly dealt with ones that were worth a lot more expensive.
I agree with you totally on that. But if we were Long Meadow or one of the Boston communities that has, we've got a very, very small budget in our CPA, and this would be a huge chunk of it.
Yeah, but to be fair to the applicant here, I mean, what you're hearing obviously is a strong difference in values and how we rank them among members of the committee, as well as, you know, I'm sure various people in Holyoke and, you know, other stakeholders similarly have wildly different values and would rank projects differently. But I'm not sure it's fair to ask the, you know, people who have come in because they value preservation of land and value having, you know, these tracts of forested and agricultural land preserved in a relatively pristine state, and value having the wildlife and climate advantages that we get from preserving as much as we can of a mountain range, to justify, you know, why their values should be more important than your values. You know, we just disagree about this, and I don't think either side is going to change the other's mind.
Yeah, well, and another thing too, if you think ahead and say we don't do the project, and say the person who's selling the land does sell it to a developer and they want to build a couple of houses, I don't think the neighbors in that area will be too happy about it. And, you know, we have to, this is their taxpayer money that we're spending here. So if they want it, if they all signed a petition that they want it to be conserved, then we need to think about that. We need to make an important issue for us when we're making our deliberations, so.
And I would just come back to the community preservation plan and the open space and recreation plan, and the fact that it hits 2 of the 3 criteria for the community preservation plan and 2 different criteria in the open space and recreation plan. And I guess they're values that Holyoke has decided that are important to them. So things like improve access to open space and recreation for all Holyoke residents, preserve natural resources and promote green infrastructure to enhance and protect neighbourhoods, supports environmental resiliency, improving undeveloped or unutilized land for the purposes of conservation, flood control, or active and passive recreation. So it's in that application there, but there are quite a lot of things that this property really does hit in those 2 plans.
Okay, anybody else have any questions, concerns? Kip, you look like you want to say something.
Yeah, this is a tough call. And I think for me the big question is that land developable? And if it were, if that could be cost effectively developed, I would, in my opinion, it would be much easier to support the allocation of this money. My question is, I'm a believer in conservation when you're buying property that would otherwise be developed, and I'd love you to make a strong case that this piece of property fits that criteria.
Well, I think the case we made is you're not going to get, I think it gets to the fragmentation component of it, that you're not going to get, so of the 52 acres that are there, or 51 and a half acres, like 100% of it won't be developed based upon just constraints of developing in Massachusetts. Like, it's not like I can come here and say, like, unless you sell this, unless you buy this right now, you're going to get, 52 houses out there, and it's going to create like traffic congestion up the wazoo. Like, I can't lie to you and say that that's going to happen, but I could say that, the scenario exists where you could have a bunch of roads carved through there to get to people's large acre lots, and based upon the fact they'd have to be largish roads and paved and stuff like that, that you would end up just carving it up and you would just diminish what's there. So you might not get a lot of housing, but you could get a lot of fragmentation, which would create that edge effect, which would take away from what people in the neighborhood value.
Yeah, and I would certainly just add really quickly, 2 things. I mean, knowing the landowner, what I do, I mean, certainly she needs to receive some value for the property. So I believe that if it's not protected, she's really going to try and sell it for development. It's not a case where I think she can. I don't think she's in the position to donate it. We do work with some landowners who are in that position, so that's great. So again, I think her realtor is going to double down if this falls through and work to make sure that a developer actually does buy it. But I think you actually touch on an interesting conundrum that land conservation works with a lot, in the sense that sometimes you aren't sure about the developability of a property, and honestly, it's sometimes hard for us to convince communities of the urgency to protect a particular property when there's not a development plan right there on the table. But at the same time, that's absolutely the time you want to act. It becomes exponentially harder when there's a plan on the table and the price of that property goes through the roof, and there's a timetable that you have to work with. Say it's a Chapter 61 right of first refusal. Those are the hardest times to conserve land. So if you can identify a piece of land that's important ecologically and get it at a fairly good price, when the market's not driving it up, boy, from our perspective, that's the time when we like to act. It really makes a lot of sense from our perspective.
I just do want to reiterate how few large parcels there are remaining. There aren't very many large parcels remaining in the city. So, in one sort of like large large statement, you can have a really meaningful impact on the long-term conservation of Rock Valley, of West Holyoke. And it's not like you're buying like a 5-acre parcel. It's a 52-acre parcel, which is pretty much bigger than the entire downtown area that we're in right now. So it's not like an insignificant chunk of land. For New England, 52 acres is a lot of land. So I think that's worth remembering as well.
Right, and I just want to say for the record, I went out and I walked the property. It's, you know, it's a beautiful piece of property. I would hate to see it developed. You know, again, my question is, can it be developed in any kind of cost effect? I don't think putting a road in there for 2 lots, you'd have the most expensive building lots in Western Mass. And
You're
so
right,
I don't
it would
think-
be.
So that's where that's my only area of concern about it is, and I hear all the points you're making. I'm not, those are good points.
Okay, go ahead.
So the other thing that I have to say is that the city would be getting back taxes of $80,000. And also, there's the potential for logging in the future for habitat development. And so the city could reap benefits from doing some logging out there, or that's 52 acres, and it's been logged about 8 years ago, so it's open for logging in the next 2 years. So there's potential for revenue to come in that way also. It also is a really beautiful area that has a 10-acre park that you're adding 50 acres to. That's a backyard for Rock Valley.
Go ahead, Mike.
Wait, so Andrew, the city would still be able to do selective cutting on there?
That would be the goal, is to make sure cutting could occur.
Yes.
Because it's not a suicide pact. You're not left to leave it the way it is forever. I mean, if there's the need to manage the forest, then it should be managed. Yeah.
Yeah, I know because the water department does quite a bit of that.
Right.
And I forget how much we got, but over $100,000 in carbon credits.
There you go.
That still allows us to continue harvesting, which was
There's a good
pretty
reason
cool.
to have trees.
Yeah. So as far as Kestrel goes, are there any ongoing fees after this? I see here that there's a project management fee. Is that an annual thing or a one-time affair?
No. All the money Kestrel would receive is upfront, and most of that is associated with long-term stewardship of the land. Kestrel is an accredited land trust with the Land Trust Alliance, and as such, it's good practice, and as such, we have to put money aside to ensure the long-term stewardship of the land and to have a legal fund available should there need to be any legal action taken.
Okay. And if we were to fund this for any amount less than the 170, is that the final one now, 174.9? That's the latest?
177,900.
If we were to agree only to the acquisition, the parcel acquisition portion, would you be able to find other funds, or are there other sources to complete the project?
I would
Grant money, anything else you have?
Probably not, I have to admit. It's hard to find outside grant money for those portions, and CPA has actually been one of the best sources over time to make that actually happen, and to have that arrangement of, an outside land trust taking on the conservation restriction for the properties. I wish there was a great foundation who would fund the project costs, and would fund the endowment, but they, they're just not out there from what I know.
I do want to note that you guys did take a little bit of a haircut on your normal fees, right? Wasn't there a reduction in the...
Yeah, and our project management costs, which basically, we obviously we're a not-for-profit. Our staff time is paid for through donations, and whenever we can build staff time into project costs, actually went into fundraising. So we usually do $5,000 per project, but we reduced that, I think.
2,500. I guess we were looking to request a little extra money, and we were looking to trim money any way we can to minimize what that extra was.
So I guess, Andrew, the extra almost $15,000 here, why wouldn't we just, if the city, if we're going to use taxpayer dollars, why wouldn't we just make this acquire the land and make it a part of the existing park and turn it over to Parks and Rec? Why would we turn it over to Kestrel?
Oh, so part of it has to do with those long-term preservation options that exist. The most sort of ironclad, rock-solid way to conserve something in perpetuity is to have a fee simple owner with a conservation restriction placed upon it. And I guess I would turn the question around and say, why wouldn't we want to extend the conservation restriction to the existing park? Because when you think about Article 97 protection, it can be overdone, it can be overcome. There was a case a few years ago when it came to the construction of Doyle Drive. There was some watershed land, about 12 or 20 acres of land that were swapped between the Holyoke Water Department and the Watershed Department, and that got taken out of Article 97, and it went through all city, state legislature, governor's desk, so it can happen, and I think what you end up with is a much better long-term preservation of a property if there's a legal entity that's like, so say for example the conservation restriction gets placed upon this parcel. It's their job from now until the end of time, which could be 12 years,
We're going.
Let's hope not.
Yeah. So anyway, to make sure that the interests of this land are preserved, and they would be legally charged with preserving this, representing the conservation values in court. So say for example the city decides to build a 50-acre parking lot out there, they would say, City of Holyoke, we're going to take you to court because you cannot do that. I mean, ideally, that would never happen, but I'm just saying, like, there's multiple ways of keeping people honest. So it's a good way to keep people honest. I do want to double back to the size. This is like among the top sort of like 5% of like total like contiguous tracts of land. So there's a few parcels that are bigger. There's like one that's owned by the Williams family that's 100 acres. There's a 75-acre parcel that's owned by another private entity, but there aren't many large parcels of this size.
I'd also just add, sorry.
No, go ahead, Mark.
Oh, I was just going to just reiterate again that obviously Kestrel's not going to be owning this property in fee. We're just going to be holding a conservation restriction. It's going to be owned by the city. And I believe, even for recreation, I believe any land acquisition through CPA has to have an outside CR on it. So it's part of the process that someone has to have it. So again, we're happy to take on that role.
And that role actually is that each year Kestrel goes out, walks the property, and monitors to make sure that there's not anybody that's in violation, whether it's ATVs or someone out there that's doing damage, dumping. So they're giving the city a heads up. So it kind of takes a lot of the city's responsibility away in terms of Kestrel being able to go out and giving them good information about what's actually happening out there. And the other part is that there's a lot of people on Mountain Road especially, but on Rock Valley also, who have horse farms, and it opens up to giving them other properties to use that property for riding and enjoying the outdoors. So I think that there's a lot of good things that could come out of this in that area, and certainly for wildlife habitat to have the corridor it needs to get from East Mountain over to the other protected properties.
Okay, anybody else? Okay, well, thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you for
coming
having
in.
us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Mike, I have to go to the ladies' room real quick, so if you want to bring the next
yes.
group in, I'll be right back.
Me too, I have to,
Victory
you
is
go back there. I'm just going to go downstairs. Okay. Use the bathroom.
Yeah, there's just 4 of us.
Oh, 1, 2, 3, 4, okay.
We don't have any, so.
It should be a human easel.
I'm dying to stand up.
No, that's okay. Fellas,
front and I'll hold the other side? Will you, okay, all right.
well, could you, prior to beginning your presentation, could all of you tell us your name and where you're from, and we can start your presentation?
My name is Bill Quadro. I represent Bar & Bar Incorporated. We're a construction management firm out of the Springfield area. We are the owner of MIFA's construction management for the project.
My name is Attorney Thomas Toby Wilson. I live in 21 Hampton Knolls in Holyoke. I just moved there, so I have the address skipped sometime. And I represent MIFA, Victory Theater.
I'm Don Sanders. I'm Executive Artistic Director of MIFA, Victory Theater.
And I'm Kathy McKean, and I'm the Managing Director of MIFA Victory Theater. I do have some handouts. I didn't make enough for the whole committee, but I can give these to you. Yep. And I wanted to apologize. In putting together the proposal, I gave you the existing conditions prior to the okay from the Historic Commission. We had put in and requested that the murals be removed and that boxes be replaced, that they be replaced by boxes. They got back to us when we made the application. Oh, okay. Thanks.
Thank you.
We made application to the Mass Historic Commission for tax credits. When we did that, initially back in '09, we wanted to replace the murals with boxes. They got back to us that December and were pretty adamant that they didn't want the boxes to be put back, that they wanted the murals to be retained. So in our next application to them, we in fact took the boxes out and put the murals in. So I apologize, and this is the updated proposal to them.
Yeah.
Sure.
The report said, or your application said that the murals were faded beyond repair. So I'm just wondering.
We were doing that in order to have them replaced by the boxes.
Oh.
Okay.
Oh.
And so they got back to us and said, we don't believe you, repair the murals. And we said, okay, fine.
So just to, so that I understand what's going on. So your application, which had a chart of what was proposed to be done inside, which included things like the note about the murals can't be repaired. We propose instead a reconfiguration to, I've forgotten the earlier date of the footprint of the theater, is no longer something you expect to do?
Yes. So, I mean, just might clarify it further. Yeah. We didn't actually ask for the boxes to be replaced. We showed the situation of the theater as it is now, which had the murals starting in 1941. Prior to 1941, it had had boxes from its being built in 1919, 1920, and we left it to the Historic Commission to make the decision which was preferable for the character of the building, et cetera. So the characterization of the murals as being faded, et cetera, was a justification that we put in if in fact the murals were not what was wanted, you know, they were in not in perfect condition.
Okay, but
and so they looked at the materials, they looked at the murals, et cetera, and came back and said we would like the murals to remain. preserved and
This is in your application for historic tax credits as opposed to in the proposal by your consultants for how the building is going to be designed now?
Correct. That was back in 2009.
And they made that ruling in 2009, and we've been operating on that. We were very happy with it. We would have been happy with either choice.
Right. And in fact, in 2012, those murals were removed, and they have been conserved by VK Restoration, and they currently reside in the basement of Gateway City Arts in a preserved state to be ready to be cleaned up and restored and then reattached to the wall.
I'm sorry, I'm just a little confused, though. Wasn't, in the existing conditions report that you gave, though, it did say that the murals are faded beyond repair?
Yes, it did.
Okay.
And they came back and said they wanted them repaired.
Right, no, I understand,
So we amended our proposal so that it reads there, and you'll see we did it in 2010.
Right, I'm referring to what she's showing.
Of the application for the tax.
Correct, and you'll see in there that we sent a new piece exactly like that. Okay? We amended our application. I didn't send you, I'm sorry, the amended one. It's in there now.
I know it's confusing, and
Well, for the sake, let me get back to the mic so that this
Yeah.
is recording properly.
Please do. Okay.
For the sake of everybody's clarity here, what we are discussing is a document that was part of the original application that, at least in the electronic form in which I, and I'm sure many others of the committee read it, did not clearly state what exactly the document was, but it did include a grid that showed various features and their existing conditions, and then responses about how the project intended to address the existing conditions. Since it seemed related to work inside the theater, I assumed, given that it wasn't in the same part of the PDF I saw with the application cover sheet or the response from the government, my reading of it was that it was from your consultants, your technical consultants, talking about their examination and what you propose to do now. And based on that, I had raised concerns about whether it blew up the tax credits.
No.
Because, obviously, you have to comply with certain government requirements. So my questions along those lines may well be answered by the document you just gave me. Because one of my questions for tonight was, but wait, I have the cover sheet for the application, I have the approved with these conditions sheet, I don't have the application itself, where is it?
Right.
So, being able to review this is enormously helpful. Thank you.
Okay.
Amy, you don't have that, so you'll make copies to make for all of us, is that?
Yeah, I can do that.
You don't have to do it now, but
But, okay, I'm sorry if I'm just wondering, though, who did write the grid that you're referring to, Mimi? To discuss?
That was as part of our application to the Mass Historic Commission.
Okay, so you wrote it?
Yes.
Yes.
That's all I want to know.
And they came back
Where it came from.
and
Okay,
said,
'cause that- I had the
they're the
same
ones that
confusion.
make the assessment.
Okay. I thought it was some outside consultant, like Mimi was saying. Okay.
No.
Yeah, and for that matter, just for our records, can we get the correspondence back and forth about, no, we won't accept that, please do this instead? And the reason I'm asking this
Absolutely.
is just, obviously, we want to ensure, as stewards of the taxpayer money entrusted to us, that we're putting it toward viable projects. And since the bulk of the funding for this is the taxpayer credits, the preservation credits, I think for our records, it's useful to be able to show that, yes, this is all as required by the tax authorities. And yes, we're conforming at every stage.
Yes.
So thanks, I appreciate that.
So just to start, there's the Victory Theater. It's really a pleasure to be in this room with a community that has embraced the CPA, which is, I think, incredible. And we'd love to see the Victory, which we believe is a sensational asset to the community, participate in the CPA and to have the pleasure that the community can give to the theater and that the theater can give back to the community. The Victory Theater is the last remaining Broadway-style theater in the entire Connecticut River Valley. And here it is in the middle of our wonderful community, and it can act as a tremendous economic and cultural and place of pleasure and pride when it reopens in the form that the architects and the contractors and everybody that's been working on this project has envisioned. And so we'd love to answer questions. We wanted to very much clarify that, which was unfortunate, and answer other questions you have about the project.
So if we give you the money for the fund, we fund what you want the money for, will you be, in other words, our funding is, you have to do the project and then you come to us to
Correct.
reimburse you. So if we give you the funding, are you going to do the murals and are you going to do the seats and remove?
Yes,
them?
absolutely.
You're going to start doing all that
Yes,
stuff and then
yes,
come back to us with
yes,
the invoices?
yes,
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 fund it.
yes, yes.
That's what I want to know.
I have a question, though. Has the theater been evaluated by some independent consultant to see, like, the degree of damage and what
If you
can be?
look, right over there are every single person who has spent hours, days, weeks, years evaluating the Victory Theater.
The theater is in 100% DD, the design process right now. So it's pretty much fully developed. We know it's going to be built. It's a matter now of budgeting and securing the funding to start the construction. We would be ready to start the construction in July if the stars align. That would be perfect. But, you know, the project is ready to go. So it's had all the architectural design, the engineering design, the structural design. It's all been fully developed at this point.
But what I was asking is, do you have an actual report that you could share with the committee on the condition of the theater?
What kind of condition?
Like,
Structural, you know, like.
Yes.
yeah, and just
Yes.
because
Yes.
in that existing conditions thing that we didn't realize who had done it, that we thought was done by an independent person, it was very detailed about different things that have damage and so forth. So I'm just wondering if you've had any of these people create a report on that, you know, and if you could share that with us.
Yes, we can.
Yes.
So in other words,
But
the way
in
the.
order to get the tax credits, the reason why I sent that back to you is they're not going to give us $5 million of tax credits if we don't do the project the way they've asked for it to be done. So it will be restored based on their recommendations.
But just
and at the end, when it's done, they come in and they check to make sure that that's exactly what happened, and then they release the funds.
No, but
So,
I think that's not Amy's question. I think what Amy is getting at, and I think actually based on our experiences in site plan review, this work has been done.
Yes.
But I think what Amy is getting at is, you know, are there this list of structural engineers and architects and so on who have actually examined the building and can attest to things like, all right, here's where there's structural damage, here is where it's sound.
Right, so
And
that's all found in the fully developed set of plans. So,
Yeah.
for example, there's a set of demolition plans which shows the structure that's not sound that has to be demolished and has to be removed. For example, along Suffolk Street, you have the 3-story elevation. The only thing that will be saved there because of the damage that's in there is the facade wall. So in order for us to take care of that, we're gonna have to shore up that wall, and we're gonna have to take out all the floor from the roof all the way down to the basement and reconstruct that. I don't know if there's like one report that gives you that, but there's a fully developed set of plans that would, if you would like to have that, we could send over a set of documents that, where you could go through it and really understand what's going on. Then there's, you know, the set of plans that indicates what the addition's gonna be and what we're gonna do to the stage box. For example, the stage box gets completely demolished, and then we go back up much higher box. And that's, the reason that is because the structure wasn't able to support just putting more brick on top and going up higher. You take it all the way down and go all the way back up. But I'm not sure there's any one document that we could give you that would, you know.
Yeah, because I have no doubt that, you know, that these plans are in place and everything, and that, you know, you have to meet these requirements. But my question is more, is it possible? Is it possible?
We have spent over $2 million on this project and stand to spend a lot more than that. And everyone, I talked to the architect yesterday, and he said to me, the one thing he doesn't lose sleep about is whether it's restorable. He has never questioned that. He said, you know, they've done projects all over the place where, yes, indeed, some of the structures were unsalvageable. Well, they redid the walls and the structure and created the project the way it was designed.
I mean, we could
You know,
find
it's
a
like-
to see if he has any kind of early documentation of their early survey of the building. Would that help you?
I think the question,
Yeah, no, this was my question originally, so I think what I was looking for was some assurance that the project was still possible, because it had been so long, and I know you guys have been working diligently for many years, but I also know you've been dealing with roof leaks and mortar loss and all the stuff that aging buildings entail. And, you know, I did find site plan review comforting on those grounds, but...
Is your question, it seems like you're heading towards, we know that back in whatever day people went in there, but now has somebody gone in there, and is that your question?
Well,
Or-
my question was, you know, is this on the point of collapse? Is it doable? I now think that that question has been answered, because at the time I asked it, you hadn't come in for site plan, and I hadn't seen or heard from the lineup of people who've reviewed it. But, you know, I jumped in here because I think you all were going back and forth. Amy may now have her own concerns on this score, but I think I was the first person who raised it, so I thought I would clarify.
it's one of the most confusing areas. When we first started on the project, the first thing that we did was to have experts come in with the first grant that we had from the state. This goes back to 2006, 2007, to assess the structural state of the building. Basically, the question was, is this building worth saving? Can it be saved? And they sent me over to, at that time, the Holyoke still existed, and they said, don't come in here while we're doing this investigation, because we don't want to hear your enthusiasm or anything. And they came out and they said, it's in incredibly good condition. And although plaster has fallen down and a impermanent roof, et cetera, that would, you know, certain things have happened since then, the then characterization that Bill is talking about says the same thing about the structure of the steel beams, et cetera, et cetera. And what's I hope helpful and reassuring is that the process that the plans go through in order to receive the federal tax credit and state tax credit designation are extremely, incredibly difficult, and they do a very firm vetting process, and they would not, as Kathy has said, award tax credits, et cetera, or give the project historic significance for the Department of the Interior, et cetera, that whole process, if they didn't, if they weren't, shall we say, as certain as they could be that the project, that the actual building is restorable, savable. Obviously, the things that are broken, et cetera, have to be replaced. But the building, the structure, the basic place is sound.
I think, I guess I'm doing this right.
Green light's on?
Now it is. I guess the one thing is that it's like all these people went in 2007, 2009, made their thing. All these people, as far as I know, at least the group, as early as, 3 weeks ago, they were in the theater. So they've been in there doing this as we went along, before and during making the plans. There was a point where we had to move things around from one part to another, and that made them go back and re-examine everything for that. They had to move the stage area and everything in the plans, and they, in order to do that, had to basically redo the structural examination. Am I right? Yeah, they had to, because they were moving everything around. So they've been in there doing this as they've been, fine-tuning the plans and, submitting the plans. So they are, yes, they are positive that this can be done. They've all said that in, I don't know if the question was met in planning, but it seemed to have been alluded to. Otherwise, I don't know if we would have been there when you saw the plans.
Yeah, no, I don't think that it was raised specifically, but the experts addressed it anyway as part of their discussion of the project.
Right.
And just before I forget to ask this, and I apologize to the rest of the committee, because this is obviously a huge, expensive project with a lot of moving parts, and we all know cost overruns happen. Do you guys have any contingency plan for if there just isn't enough money to do it perfectly and you start looking at the fundraising slowing down? And is there any contingency plan for getting it up and running under those circumstances, or?
There is a contingency line in the budget that has been very ruthlessly put in and looked at and predicted as much as can be humanly possible in the actual construction budget for unforeseen events, but it's not a phased budget in the sense that one of the difficult things that we've faced, and I can tell you it's very difficult to face it, is that it's not an incremental project. The tax credits, the way they work, do not enable you to do part of the building and then another year do another part, et cetera, because then they would be put into such a position of wondering whether this project would ever get done. So the demand on us and on the community and on everybody who loves this project is that everything that's necessary has to be raised, basically, and shown as on the table, but for the construction part to begin. And it is not until the construction is over that the tax credits get paid. So you have to have bridge loans, all sorts of things, but you have to show, so it is not an incremental project, and that's been very hard. It was hard for me to understand, because some of us would want to go in and perhaps do it yourself things, et cetera. It's just not possible in a historic project of this scope and size.
So basically, you guys won't be able to break ground until you have 100% of the funding guaranteed.
Yes.
Okay.
Know where it's coming from.
Or know where it's coming from. It doesn't have to be exactly.
Yeah, no, I assume that this will be bridge loans
Yes,
and et cetera,
yes,
but you'll have to have it
yes,
all. It's some
yes,
kind of
yes.
guaranteed,
Correct.
yes, we have this.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
So there is no risk
Yep.
of you break ground and
Yep.
you've spent 30 million and
Yeah.
there's 20 million still to raise.
Right. No.
Okay.
No.
Do you have a
I do. So I see there's an architect. Are there, and you said there was 100% design developed. Does that mean 100% design development construction documents?
Yes.
Yes.
No, the construction
Design development, so, 'cause it would.
100% DD.
Construction document phase at this point.
So usually there's schematic design, design development, construction documents, CA. You're at the 100% design development phase?
Yes.
So you don't have full construction documents developed, you have up to design development?
Correct.
So we could say the architectural side is much more than 100% design development. The mechanical side is probably a little bit less.
Sure.
Right? So
Yeah,
it's,
typically it would be.
It's in that stage. So there would be one more round of drawing after this.
So, my dilemma is that I really don't know what this looks like. Is it at all helpful to, I mean, I see the facade.
Okay,
Yeah, well, we have another facade.
Yeah. And, I mean, we were going to answer questions tonight. We're going to have much more visual stuff next week.
So, would it be helpful to the committee if maybe we got the plans and I could certainly take a look at them and then maybe be able to give some explanation or?
Oh, sure. Well, we don't have to make any decisions tonight. We absolutely can wait.
Would it
for
be in
those.
our purview to ask for the plans and be able to kind of look
Sure.
at them? And I'm pretty certain I could be able to kind of, maybe with some assistance, but I'm pretty sure I could sort of decipher them a little bit and be able to.
What extent do we?
Well, I have a set because of planning board and, probably more than one. I feel bad. I brought them like 2 weeks ago because they were so beautiful and I handed them around and I think you weren't here. But, if you don't happen to have extras sitting around the offices, I can certainly turn mine over to you.
Well, and I could also do an electronic version if that were possible. I just don't know if
Yeah,
it would
no,
be
they're
helpful to
very
other
detailed.
members. For me personally, I've never been inside. I Googled it and I saw a couple of images of what looked like super deteriorated, part of the backstage area. And it's nice to kind of have in mind, oh, that's what it's going to look like. I imagine a DD set probably has some demolition drawings. It probably has some floor plans. It maybe has some interior elevations.
Actually, in
Would like a
the
link.
packet that I just gave, there is one piece, one sheet of the report from Evergreen, who does the historic finishes. And I'd be glad to send that in electronic copy if you'd like. It deals with all of the historic finishes and their recommendations.
But I have to say, I know you probably can't hear me, but no one else has ever told me they can't hear me. But one of the things is, and I think that Ms. Panich, to see the drawings is, I think that's very important. Once you see them and what it's going to look like and everything, I've been working with these people for months and it changed my perspective when I finally saw the whole, maybe I'm wrong, but I think it might.
Well, it might be helpful to us to be able to see it, and I could certainly assist if that's something we want to pursue. And
We have a link to the documents.
Right.
And just give me your email address. I'll get it before we leave if you'd like, or whoever on the committee would like to have it, and I'll send the link out. It's very simple. You can open them up. They're all in PDF format, and you can go through the drawings at your leisure.
We could send it to you, and you can send it around to us.
Yeah, I
or
could
to
certainly
Amy,
do that,
Or
and-
Amy can
Yeah.
get it for us.
Yeah, maybe
Yeah, you can
print it
send
out.
it to me. I know, so there's a lot, obviously, this is a huge project with many facets, and that's why you're, applying for these Massachusetts historic tax credits. But I'm wondering can you specify how the CPA funding would be used? I think the application talked about restoration of the murals, but somebody else said, or maybe you mentioned, Kathy, like restoring the seats. So it's not that the
Says it
money
in there.
can't. I think that we need to know like exactly what the CPA portion of the money would go toward, so that when if this was awarded, the disbursements, we would know, oh, this invoice is for, even though, yes, it's part of a larger project, so.
In answer to the phase 2 question, part 2 questions, I think I gave you,
Yeah, it's in here.
right now, we're actually going through the construction estimate and pulling out some things. But the three things that were immediately findable in a huge document were the mural restoration, which is approximately $40,000. And that would be going to VK Restoration here in Holyoke. And then the seats, the seat restoration, which was $877,276. And that we are currently working with the Sheriff's Department and York Street Industries to have them be the rehabilitator of the seats. And then the other thing was the the 250,000, the marquee and blade, which actually Agnoli Signs out of Springfield made the original sign, and they have volunteered a enthusiastic wanting to be able to do that again for us, to make sure that the Victory blade shines on Suffolk Street.
So you're going to figure out when you go through that, like what this 300,000, 100,000 per year would
Yes.
go toward, and
I mean,
give us specifics.
those are the three projects I can think of that are projects that I think fit your mandate. They're absolutely visible kinds of projects that you can then point to when someone asks, what did the CPA pay for? You can tell them it was either the seats or the blade and the marquee, or the murals, which will be rehung on either side of the stage in the main auditorium.
Kathy, were we going to look at the facade at all?
I mean, we could. The other thing is that we have been talking for many years to Alicia Zoller, Community Development. And they are also able to spend community development dollars on facade, on windows, all of those things that we will need. And so those are the things that I've been talking to her about. And we just pulled out a few things that I thought would make the most sense for you all to put your names on.
Just a quick technical question. I had heard from the planning office that the current blade sign, there was some question about whether it can be restored or whether it will have to be remade.
It is no longer available.
Okay, so
it went down to Jimmy Curran and then met an untimely death in his warehouse.
Lived out of
Right.
So it is no longer able to be restored. However, they do make signs all the time in Agnoli and know what that one looked like.
Yeah, no, it's well
and we'll do it
documented.
all in LED lights, which will cost us a lot less in electricity, so.
Yeah, no, I just, because this is obviously a process riddled with technicalities, I figured we'd better have the technical details. And I happen to know about that just because it came up in the course of how are we going to work with the sign ordinances to make this happen.
Right.
And
yes.
Okay.
New signs different from old signs. Anyway.
I think the committee has two concerns, and if I hear everybody right, in our deliberations over the last week and a half, we don't want to spend we don't want to put our money into something that's not going to happen. I think they made that clear already. The second thing is we are reluctant to put money aside for a project if it's not used right away. We want to see results right away. So, that's our other concern. I mean, if we give you $100,000 this year, we want invoices for $100,000, and the same thing. In other words, unless you make a good case, and we could wait and put $100,000 every year aside for you for the next 3 years. I mean, this is our prerogative. I don't know if we would want to do that, and then give you the $300,000 at that point when we have it after 3 years, and then give it to you then, and then have you do stuff and give us invoices. So, I think we need to clarify how that's all going to work, because several projects have come in to us and said, well, we're not going to do anything now, but could you promise us $100,000, put that aside for us? And, we want to see results. We want to see stuff done. So, that's, I'm just putting that out there for information's sake. You
and
can
me
mull it over.
Yes.
Yeah, so.
Both of those seem like really completely rational and commonsensical concerns, and we certainly would work with you in whatever way makes you feel comfortable, and we would be taking advice from the contractors and everybody who is really looking at the timeline that this is scheduled to go on. We do have a scheduled timeline, et cetera, and we would work out where it would fit. There's certainly a timeline for the first year, the second year. I mean, we were hoping to have this theater open December 31st, 2020. So we would work with you and be very open about working with you, and on however works best for the committee and the intelligent use of the funds, et cetera, et cetera. I think that I feel confident enough to say that there would always be something that would fit the use of the funds of these 3 or 4 projects that Kathy's outlined, that we could feel very comfortable in saying this is going to happen by such and such a time, et cetera, et cetera. But as I say, we would, and we would work very closely with the committee and be clear on the schedule, et cetera, and when you want to invoice, et cetera. Yes, no problem.
Okay, anybody else? You go ahead, Mike.
So, first I'd like to address some of the concerns that were presented by the public when we had our public hearings back at the senior center. And one of the big concerns throughout just about every table was, number one, the timeline. I think we were originally looking at a date of 2012.
I think the original group hoped that it would be open in 1992.
So there's, and I love the work you guys are doing. This is, I'm just expressing what came out of the public hearings.
Yes.
Is a great deal of skepticism about it ever coming to fruition.
Yes.
I understand the part about how long it takes to get tax credits and stuff, but now we're talking about, we've got to, give us some assurance this is really going to start this time.
Well, the assurance I can give is that we are proportionately, in terms of the funds needed, so much farther along than was ever in a certain way imaginable. I mean, the infusion of the $13 million bond from the legislature, which I should also say was granted with a really, really, strong vetting process, et cetera. We are, at least, I think we could use the percentage 74 to 76% of having in hand the monies that are necessary for the whole project, and we have very clear path ahead of us as to where the rest of the monies will come from, et cetera, et cetera. So we feel assured enough to have Bill and Dirkie Brown and everybody else who's working on this project working on it and on a timeline that is reasonable and can happen. Obviously, there could be some, delay or what, but we feel the timeline is reasonable.
I get it. I get it. I just want to address these.
Yes, absolutely.
One of the things that is different is that last year with the Tax Act that was passed last year, the historic tax credit regulations changed. And so what we're
Is your
trying to
microphone
do...
on, Kathy?
Huh?
We
Yeah,
got to make
lights
sure.
on.
Just, you can move it closer.
Oh, okay.
We got to make sure the public's hearing the responses.
Usually not a problem hearing me. But what happened was that the old rules gave a 5-year time frame to get the tax credits. We have to they have to be sold, and then we get the equity from them. But the sellers get the tax credits up to 5 years, according to the old rules. In the new rules, they only get them for 1 year, so that their actual value has gone down as a tax credit. So that what we're trying to do is to finish this project by December 31st, 2020, so that we will get in under the old rules, so that they'll have the five years. Our tax consultants have said that it really looks like in the combined state and federal tax credits, we could lose about $1 million out of that package if we are not done by December 31st, 2020. So that's just an added impetus for us to finish it, because $1 million is very hard to come by.
Okay, so the other question, the big concern that came out of the public hearings was, as this timeline has gone out, the cost has exponentially blown up, and I'm throwing out ballpark, but and the numbers are like from 12 million to 24 million to 43 million.
Have we stabilized?
Have we reached the top of the tower here?
Yeah. I can actually say exactly in my life with this project, we started, the first folks that came in and looked at the project in 2007 estimated it would be about $25 million. And then in 2009, when we did going through the historic tax credit route, et cetera, it was looked at as if it being completed in 2013, 2012, 2013, it had escalated to $28 million. Then things sat for a bit, and the price of things did not increase. We had everybody was still reeling from the recession of 2008, and I think Bill will, the construction prices and costs of things stayed pretty stable until actually, I'm going to say, 2 years ago. And 2 years ago, when we went to re-estimate what had already been achieved in the plans, et cetera, it had gone up at least 6%. So the increase, that was the biggest increase. So now, if we hit this December 31st, 2020 mark, we're in a definable territory where we know that what we're looking at now, is going to be reasonably stable and not, increase anymore. And it's of course the thing that we live with every minute of the day.
It was a big question for the public.
Yes, and rightly so. And we really want the public to be comfortable with knowing what we know, and that anything we know, we always share, and live on that same plane of knowing and needing to know and wanting to know.
Well, it is a big concern because the project now is approaching 40% of the entire budget, annual budget of the city. So it is quite a question.
Yes. And we hope that successfully it will return something similar to the economy of the city when it's open.
And we all do. We all do. Now, if we were to take on some, if one of the things we would mention were the murals or seats or even a sign restaurant, if for some reason we began this work and this work was completed, but the rest of the project fell short, the murals, for example, right now they're in crates. If they were to be restored but never installed and we're still in crates, would MIFA agree to like we do a reverter clause where the crates that get stored with our stained glass windows or something else, since we did the restoration and, heaven forbid the project didn't go through, we'd have some protection here.
Well, my reaction to that, and I think the MIFA board, and we would address each issue like that, and want to totally respect what you felt was best for your stewardship of this money and this wonderful thing that's happening for the city called a CPA. We want to be a good advertisement for that, so we would work in whatever way made sense. It is a very tricky. It's tricky. It's tricky. I have to feel that there's a way to do it as we know more when the completion of a particular project will be and its cost, et cetera. And given that it's an invoice situation, I mean, certainly I don't think anything would be invoiced until it is ready, and we would make sure or work obviously towards what the chosen project was, that it would be done within the year that an award was made.
And my final question would be for Bill, and if you use the microphone, please. Have you people ever done a historic renovation of this type, and can you give us a few examples?
Well, we've done the Hanover Theater in Worcester. Has anybody been to that one? That building was, we took the back off and we took the front off, and you could see right through it. That theater is a beautiful theater today. We've worked in New York City at Schubert Theater. We've done the Colonial up in Pittsfield. We've done the Rockefeller Center in New York City. So we're well versed in restoration work. And then we've done local restoration projects here in town. The Springfield, the latest one we did was Caring Health Center, for example, and restored that to its current use. So yes, we're well versed.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions? Okay. Amy?
So I'm just wondering, I know, how soon do you think that you can give us a timeline and more details, like you were talking about, Kathy, like the work to be done? And
the timeline we're working on now, in terms of details, I mean, what you have are three examples of things that you could indeed use CPA funds to fund. I'm not sure.
I'm just thinking, ahead, that if, in order for the committee to make an informed decision, they need to know like what the timeline will be, what the work will be, what the contract agreement is going to stipulate, they need to know that in order to make a decision. So, yeah.
We're working on contracts and with subs now. As Bill said, we don't have construction documents. It isn't out to bid yet. So what we're doing is, and I mean, Bill can speak to this and how we've come up with these. VTEX proposal is actually here. I mean, I have a copy from 2012. I put a little escalation in it, but it basically lines out exactly what he's going to do. And the work would start when we have the money and construction begins. And that is right now what we're working on in terms of a timeline for the work to happen.
Yeah, no, I think, we haven't, or at least I hadn't thought that far ahead, but I think here some of what Amy is getting at may be that as a technical matter, it may be easier for us to fund, say, 3 specific aspects of restoration than to give an unspecified, $100,000 for, some set of projects to include something from this list we aren't sure what yet. And if we do it that way, obviously we have some assurance, because this is one project and won't be phased, that no ground will be broken and no work will begin until you at least think you've got the whole thing funded and have lined up. And,
Right.
We can build those contingencies into a final agreement. But I think, and Amy, jump in if I'm not getting at what you're talking about, is
That's what I'm talking about.
If, say, one of the projects that we decide to fund is the murals, we will then want what we need to do to write in targets for the murals and when you would start working and when we would expect them to be done and what. Okay, yeah. I mean, that you get the idea. I don't have to elaborate.
All that would have to be stipulated, with deadlines and everything. So.
I think in our way, in discussing and identifying what projects Kathy and I, but we've all talked about, would be very wise to do it to look at it and, as the baby is born, understand what the timeline is and how that can fit with what your needs are and what your timeline is.
Right. I mean, we can indeed take out all of those seats as soon as they're ready to be received somewhere, so that project could start next week.
Well, except that it makes no sense to start it until you have all the money to finish it. And
Correct.
I'm assuming that in light of our discussion tonight, and I hadn't been clear on that before this, that when the trigger is pulled,
Yes.
there will be an intense period during which a whole lot is being done.
Yeah, exactly. And that's very important to understand. There is some phasing per each of those projects that would be relevant to the project. I mean, in other words,
which is
the
part of
murals
what we're
could be
asking
made
about.
ready to, there are phases, but in general, yeah.
Yeah, but certainly, we're not going to be working on the murals until they're ready to go, because there's no point.
That's right. And there's no place to put them once.
Yes. Yeah.
They'd be back at Gateway City Arts, and I don't think VTech really wants them forever.
And furthermore, as we've been hearing from Marcos in relation to other projects, you don't want to do the restoration work and have it start to deteriorate.
No.
You want to have it done when it's ready to go up.
Right.
Yes.
Although there are some stars of the stage and screen that do phased restoration work on their physiques, with obvious
Yes,
results.
well, but I don't think anybody is going to come to us and ask for money for that.
No, you'd be surprised. Yes, yeah.
I am a historical treasure. Please fix me.
Yeah, I mean, the same is true of like the seats. I mean, obviously, we could have 1,600 beautifully restored seats sitting in storage in the old AMPAD building, and the theater doesn't happen. I don't think that's going to happen. But then I guess, the job would be to find a theater that needs 1,600 first-rate seats like that. I mean, but that, yeah.
But part of our work will be building in any agreement so that
Yes,
that can't happen.
absolutely. And I think that would be so difficult, not in a certain way, challenge, but very commonsensical and very exciting to come to in terms of the committee's work on preservation. I've come to learn that preservation is not something that's really very easy to put into, a timeline. So it might be wise to be able to think in those terms, particularly with so many projects in this city that, need preservation, but might need flexible timelines.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay. Thank you very much for coming in, and
Thank you.
we will be in
Thank
touch,
you.
I'm sure. Okay, am I mistaken about the last meeting that we had, which would have been the 25th? Was that what's the last meeting we had? Was it the 25th?
Friday, right?
Friday, what was the Friday? The
25th.
First, that was the first, February 1st, okay. So I'm trying to figure out what minutes we need to,
That's it.
yeah, what, that's it? We don't,
That's
we
it.
just,
The other two,
We approved the other
We
two.
did the other two.
the other two.
today. The 25th and
You
the
did this?
23rd.
You
Yes.
did those, okay.
Yes.
And so we just need the first?
Yes.
And tonight?
Yes.
Okay,
Right.
that's what I want to know. 2-1 and 2-6, outstanding. Okay, very good.
So have we looked at our budget? I know I've missed a couple of meetings, so.
Okay.
But our overall
Yes.
funding of projects.
Got to stay on the air.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I'm wondering whether we have looked at what our total available funds are for projects, and whether we have looked at each of the categories, looked at what the applicants have requested. So if we, as an example, if our maximum for open space is $400,000, do we have $500,000 worth of applications, or do we have 200,000? I just
Exactly.
think that will be helpful in
Yeah.
prioritizing what projects
Yeah,
we make.
I'm also concerned about how much is left in the admin budget, because I don't,
Let's just stay on the
Okay,
projects for
yeah.
just a
no,
second.
but I'm getting to your point. What I'm saying is that I really want to meet with Andrew to go over exactly what you're talking about. And the admin budget is important, because I don't want to be working for free, basically, which might end up happening. You
Okay,
know, If
yeah.
we're
I
not
can
able
answer-
to parse out.
I can answer part of that question. I got in fact, I think I sent it out to everybody. I got an email today from Andrew. He was supposed to be here tonight with the answers to those questions. And he had to go to a funeral, I guess, in Worcester. So he did say that night meetings for him are not good. He doesn't want to promise that he's going to be here for any more night meetings, and if we want to replace him, he is okay with that. But we need someone who, he's got institutional knowledge already that is very important to us, and he can answer those questions, but he just can't be here at a meeting. So he has volunteered to meet with Amy during the day. He can meet with her
Yeah,
during the
I
day.
sent him an email, but sometimes I don't hear back. I know he's just got a lot on his plate, but I'm hoping we'll actually meet. And
But he understands now that he has to get back to us with the answers to those questions.
because I brought up what you just said, because you had mentioned this at a previous meeting, and he said, oh, I know what he's talking about, and we can work on that. We have to work on that together. That was quite a long time ago, yeah. So.
Yes, and the same thing with the admin budget, the same in all.
Can we
and
schedule
whole
a
budget.
daytime meeting?
I'm sorry?
Can we schedule a daytime
Well, we
meeting?
can't
or is
schedule
that-
it without him.
Yeah,
We have to make sure that it's something he
yes,
can do.
But he
Yes,
can do
but in
it.
theory, is there any rule preventing us from meeting during the day?
Oh, as a group? Well,
Yes,
no,
well-
only for people who have to work. I can meet during the day.
I can
but-
meet during the day.
I can too, most days,
Yep.
some days.
Yeah,
I'm at work, I can take time off of work. It's a little more difficult
Well-
to volunteer that way.
So you're suggesting a whole committee meeting with him?
Well, I'm suggesting that, if people are interested in speaking directly to our treasurer about any of this, one way of doing this would be to, instead of asking Amy to meet privately with him, which is certainly fine by me, we just schedule a daytime meeting and whoever, as long as there's a sufficient number of us.
Well, I mean, it seems to me it might be something that could be done just by simple email. And I know we have to be
Yeah.
careful, public meeting violations, but if Amy's sending an email to Andrew asking him to look at what our overall available funds are, and either Amy or Andrew adds up our applications and we say, okay, in each category we have one application, five
Yeah.
applications
I mean, if
for
this-
these dollars.
Oh, yeah,
No,
that's, yeah.
Yeah, if people
think we
don't
need to
expect
meet
to
to do
have
that. I
questions.
I don't think we need to meet
Then we
either.
don't.
No.
It was only if people expect that there are going to be questions coming out of this that,
I mean, I would think having that information available for the public hearing would be
yeah, but certainly,
important
I
to
mean,
the
I
public.
agree that getting the information is important.
I wonder if we'll be able to do that before the public hearing.
Well, if we can, we can, we will. If we
Well,
can't, we can't.
If we can.
I mean, he
Well,
should,
it's
you gotta
kind
be
of
talking 20 minutes
complex
work here.
because it's
Yeah.
like, I'm now able to get into the Munis system to see the funds, and there's all these codes for everything, but then there's sort of the overlay of the CPA and how that works in conjunction with what's actually in Munis. So
Well,
it's
let's just look at
so-
it in a very simple way first, which is we have, what, 10 applications? And
12.
at least 12?
12,
And at
yeah.
least one in each category?
Yeah.
And let's just look at a total request
Right.
for funding under each of the
The reason
three
it's a little
applications.
complicated is because some of the money is projected and some is what we know we've collected. So it's a matter of whether we're going to go with what we've actually collected or that as well as what's projected to be collected.
So my suggestion would be to first look at what funds have been
Yeah.
requested.
Have been
Not
collected.
What's available, what's been,
Requested.
what app, when you
Right,
look at
right.
these
No, I
10 or
understand.
12 applications, what do they add up to and how much in each category? And then we could have a second column with actual funds collected, comparing those, and a third column of projected funds
Yeah.
to what has
Yeah.
been requested.
Yeah, I'd like to do that. I need to meet with Andrew to
Yes,
do it.
yes. And, you know, hopefully he can meet with you in the next week before our public hearing. If he can't, well, hopefully, you know, I told him pretty much, I said, Andrew, we can't go forward without knowing these funds. You have to give us some numbers, and, you know.
And if he
so-
steps down, have you thought of who will replace
I
him?
asked him if he knew anybody, if anybody else knows anyone who's good at accounting. I mean, we can vote to replace him. We can do that. We don't have to go through the city council. But it would only be until July 1st, and then the city council gets to appoint someone new, or the what person we have, or whatever. But we could replace him from now to July 1st. But who are we gonna
He seems
get that?
willing,
But-
so I think just work with him.
Yeah, right, because he has the knowledge. I mean, he knows where we are.
He's very knowledgeable. That's,
Yeah.
that's
So
definitely
Amy,
true.
we don't need Andrew to go through the 12 applications
No,
and
we
to
don't
add
need
up
that.
what we have.
Right.
So let's please, if we can, start with that to
Yeah,
look at.
certainly, I can do that.
And then
One of the things is that
that
many
for
of
public.
the different applicants have changed the amount of the requests that they're asking for, like up till very recently. So, but I mean, that's why I've been emailing, I've also emailed everybody that reference that says like what has been requested right now. But I mean, certainly I can take that column and add it up, but I need to work with Andrew to figure
Yeah.
out the other aspects.
Right, exactly. So
And
at
also,
least,
like, because money is constantly coming in and out of the admin budget, so it's sort of, well, I guess that's just the admin budget. I'm trying to,
we haven't spent anything in the
right,
project
out of the
budget.
others, okay. yeah.
Nothing, no.
Yeah. I just need to speak with him because has more of a background in all of this, so.
Okay, so that's good. So hopefully we can get that information, and if we don't, it's just information, so it's not something we have to have
Yeah.
a meeting about. We can get that information by email as soon as you meet with them and we figure out the numbers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He didn't tell you when he can meet with me, though, right?
No, but I will reiterate that he needs to meet with you, yes.
What is our next meeting?
Our next meeting is the public hearings next week, 13th and 15th. And we are all set for those meetings. They're scheduled. Oh, I got the news, there was this article today in the Sun, and
Oh, good.
And there's also, here's your public.
Oh, I wish if you had told me you were going to do that, I wouldn't have paid for the tear sheets.
Oh, well,
Okay.
it doesn't matter. I must have missed the first one. This must be the second one.
Oh, so you only have the second
I only
one.
have the
Okay, I
second
have
one,
the first
yeah.
one, yeah.
So these two things were in today's paper, so I'm pass that down to you. You can keep
Why are
those
there
for
two?
And they're at 6 o'clock,
6 o'clock.
senior center.
Senior Center, I hope,
There's one of
13th and 15th,
13th and
Wednesday
15th.
and Friday. Wednesday and Friday night.
Article what?
And then I don't know, did we schedule? No, no, that's not the Sun. That's the Republican, that's the Holyoke Plus. Today's Holyoke Plus, yeah.
So how did this get in?
I did that, yeah.
What's Holyoke Plus?
That was free.
Oh, I've never heard of the Republican Plus.
It's on Wednesdays, Holyoke Plus, it's called.
Oh, it's a
Or-
free paper?
No,
No, it's part of the Republican.
Oh,
But they will often run articles
wow, they
of
put a
this
lot more
sort.
detail.
yeah, well, I
Yeah,
gave
well,
them that information.
yeah, our chair
I did
probably wrote
I
it.
did, actually, it was a letter, and they said, do you want a letter or do you want an article? I said, whatever works for you guys, just get it in there, that'll be fine, and that's what they did, so, with the information. Okay, so, yeah, do we have a meeting scheduled for after the public hearings, Amy?
Yes, we do.
Okay, what is that one?
Fine, where am I? Sorry. I think I just turned my phone off by accident. Oh, here it is. Okay, hold on. So yes, for the February 20th, we have discussed and start to draft the operational and admin budget for the mayor. So it'd be good for all of this work to be done with, because this has to be submitted to the mayor, and then I think he has 7 days to look it over.
Before
I
he
guess
puts his budget in, we have to give him another budget.
I guess it's based on what the recommendations are.
Oh, you're not.
Oh, no, sorry, that's separate.
Yeah,
Then
that's-
on the 27th, which is a Wednesday, February 27th, review and approve recommendations for the mayor. So that's the recommendations that will go to the city council.
But on the 20th, we're meeting to do budget work?
I think I must have read this in the ordinance or somewhere I read this and I can't remember, but to discuss the operational and administrative budget for the mayor.
Right, in the spring, before he puts his budget in, which is shortly, he's gonna have to do that.
Okay.
We have to give him our budget for this year. And Andrew knows that, we've done it before.
Okay.
Yeah, so he has to do that, so.
So you don't think we need to meet for that?
Well, it might be a good idea then to start meeting to talk about what.
Budget
what
stuff
this-
like he brought up.
Yes, the project budget and what we have for money and start talking about
Yeah.
where we're going on the
Okay.
projects, because then the next week we have to decide, right?
Although if Andrew can't come to an evening meeting, then I
But
don't.
you're gonna meet with them in the meantime before,
Oh,
yes.
well, hopefully I'll be able to convey everything.
And hopefully you have him put something on paper for us. We need a
Okay.
printout of what's the story.
Okay, yeah,
here.
that would be good.
Yeah, yeah.
So, yeah, the 20th, the 27th, and then I think what I have is for the 13th of March to complete the orders for city council for the recommendation.
Yeah, so we have
So
a
those are three
short window
meetings
there of a few
that have been
weeks.
set up.
We have to decide what we're gonna do.
Yeah.
Yep, okay. Three, what was the one in March? Three what?
I just closed my calendar. March 13th.
Okay.
Are you, but that's on Wednesday, so you still wouldn't be able to come here at 6 o'clock, right?
No, we'd have to go back to 6:45 then.
Okay.
But, we don't have any projects coming in.
Okay.
Did the historical people show up tonight? Oh, good. I'll have to listen to that, so I guess.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
they they weren't able, they need to discuss it more with Marco Morera.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Marcos
Sorry, I get them mixed up.
Morales, yeah. No, not Marrero, Marcos Marrero, yes. Okay. So they're going to get back
But they
to
do
us?
want
or-
to, yeah, Shannon Walsh was saying up from the Pioneer Valley
Planning.
Commission
Mhm.
that many CPA communities, the way they do it is after, an applicant meets the eligibility requirements, then they come back to the Holyoke, they actually go to the Holyoke Historic Commission to present the scope of work and then get the opinion of the Holyoke Historic Commission on it.
Okay.
But we didn't do things that way, but if we can share what we have of, what we know of what these applicants wanted, that are historical, what they want to do.
Mhm.
So, but, with the Holyoke Historic Commission, they could give their opinion, or at least tell us, well, there's not enough information here. We need to know more in order to make a good, suggestion on whether this work should be done.
Okay.
So, and that's one of the things that I struggle with, is that it's very vague with many of these rehabilitation projects. So it may be hard for them to determine, based on what we know at this point, so.
I think what we heard was that at least getting a letter of support would be helpful.
Well, we do have letters of support. That is what we did
Right.
do.
From the Historical Commission?
Right, but usually the second step is then to present, okay, here's what our proposal is. And then the Holyoke Historic Commission will
Get some
say,
feedback, yeah, from them.
yes, we think that that's a good, or no, we don't approve of that, or whatever, so it's not, they have to know what the actual proposal is.
Right.
Not just that this is a significant resource, but what work will be done there.
Okay, so are you going to get that information to them so they can get back to us
Well,
by the time we're
I
discussing?
did already share the applications with them, and they
Okay.
just, but it's just that as I just said, a lot of the work is sort of vague. A lot of the proposed work is vague. So I can try to, ask the applicants for more specific details. And I can share whatever I have, yes.
If it's vague, right, if it's vague, then the Historical Commission should say what it is
Right,
that they want
yeah.
to make it more, rather than you, to make them more understandable to them, so they can make it, just give
Okay.
us
Yeah,
some
I
advice.
mean, I already sent a long email, which you saw, where I, had all the different links to the applications and some of the concerns that have been brought up and what they basically are saying they want to do for these historic rehabilitation projects.
Okay,
So
great.
I'll be in touch with Debbie to find
Okay.
out, what more.
And I think we did ask that they ask those questions for us and point out where they would ask for more detail.
Okay, good.
So they said they were on it, assuming that Marcos approves, because they've got some constraints with their time and staffing over there. But it certainly sounds like they're on it.
Okay, all right, great. Okay, good. All right, so anything else? Any other new business? I know, Amy, you had some concerns about what was in the ordinance regarding the budget and what reports we have to
Oh,
make to
yeah.
the city council, but we didn't do it, so, we didn't do it this year, so we'll do it next year, but we will give them one report. And, we have to get that from Andrew. We'll get a report from him to give to the city council.
Okay, well, I hope that won't be a problem.
It can't be, because
They
it's
didn't.
too late to do the others.
Yeah.
We were supposed to give them a report every 3 months. I don't know.
Yeah, it
I'm
was
gonna
a
try to
quarterly
change that whole
report,
thing.
yeah.
Get that out of there.
I mean, I wondered if maybe when they put that into the
been crying
ordinance,
for it.
they were thinking
Yeah, I
about, they were thinking about when disbursements start occurring, going out to the projects, rather than at this time before any disbursements have gone out, because not much has changed.
Right,
you know
so
what I'm
they're not
saying?
missing
So-
anything. It's basically,
So I'm hoping that they
Nothing's-
won't be
yeah.
upset by that,
no.
Well, and I would
Yeah.
suggest that given the burden on the city council, which is substantial, possibly not getting these reports that don't say anything every 3 months is not the worst thing that ever happened to them.
My sense is, and I'll reach out to the council president and some others, that what they're looking forward is our recommendations for final approval.
Yeah, right. And they'll see the budget then, because they'll know what our projects are and how much money we have and how much we're recommending spending anyways.
Yep.
Okay, are we ready to adjourn? Have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second? Who's second?
Lacking a second, we stay here.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.